My sister turned justice into a weapon she swung at others. She asked gently why I wasn't eating the sweets our aunt had so kindly brought. She spat that I was awful, saying our aunt would be crushed with sorrow. I just suggested that if she was so worried, she should eat them. In response, my sister crossed her arms and sank into a pounding silence. She shoved them at me, only because she didn't want them herself. She always wrapped people in guilt, acting holy while she pulled the strings. That's why I made up my mind. I had to live a life completely apart from her. From the passenger seat, she let out a lazy, exasperated sigh. She whined, "Are we there yet?" I gripped the wheel tight and snapped at her to be quiet. I'd already answered. We pulled into the temporary parking lot for the fireworks festival, the air buzzing with excitement. I opened the trunk. She stretched with a weary groan and complained that she was tired. I took stock of our supplies, my eyes lingering on the bento boxes and the drinks. A sly, opportunistic smile slid across her face. She asked which cooler held the alcohol and offered to shoulder the heaviest one. My friend gave me a knowing pat, clearly aware she was pulling a manipulative trick. She waved goodbye, calling out that they'd go on ahead to save a spot. I ended up alone, stuck lugging most of the luggage. I sighed, thinking she had at least one thing with her. Better than nothing. I steeled myself, knowing I'd finally made it this far. Next year I'd be off to college far away, finally free of her. In that instant, a sickening ripping sound split the air, and a blood-curdling scream followed. My face froze into a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. I blinked and found myself in a forest, wondering where the parking lot had gone. What? This was the parking lot? I murmured, my voice trembling with disbelief. I was carrying our supplies when I looked up and saw the car had completely vanished. I looked up at the unfamiliar trees. The only thing I could hear was birdsong. I blinked, my heart racing, and wondered if I'd really come camping or if this was all just a dream. I frantically checked my phone, my heart sinking when I saw there was no signal. I forced myself to calm down. If I just kept walking, I'd find a town. I drew a deep breath and set off into the dense, silent woods. Soon my path brought me to a small, clear stream that danced and sparkled in the sun. I sat by its bank, marveling at how clean and beautiful the water was. I made up my mind to follow the river a little farther downstream. The stream widened, and before them lay a vast, windswept coastline stretching to the horizon. I stood there, panting from the long walk, stunned to be staring at the scene before me. I'd been walking for so long without a single soul in sight. How could this be? My stomach let out a loud growl that cut through my bewildered thoughts. I sighed with relief when I found the cooler box, brimming with drinks and bento. Sitting on the rocky shore, I began to eat, letting each bite ground me. I couldn't help smiling. The beach lay pristine, not a scrap of plastic in sight. A grim certainty hit me. I had to get ready to spend the night. The sun sank toward the horizon, stretching long shadows across the land. I grabbed the pliers from our kit and with slow, steady hands, stripped the bark from driftwood. I was relieved to have the supplies my sister had accidentally made me bring. I clung to the survival shows I'd watched. They were my only guide in this strange new reality. I plunged into the grueling work of trying to start a fire with a bow drill. This strange, unfamiliar work drained me. My whole body strained with the effort. Pain flooded my hands and they began to tremble. My strength was fading fast. I could feel the sun slipping away. I had to race it and get a fire started. Just when I was about to give up, a thin wisp of smoke curled into view. Smoke was coming out, and I cried, renewed by a surge of desperate hope. I blew softly on the precious ember, coaxing the fragile flame to grow. Finally, the fire took hold, and I knew I would protect it with my life. The dark forest closed in around me, trees crowding close beneath a glittering canopy of stars. The campfire popped and crackled, a tiny beacon of light in the endless dark. Utterly exhausted, I sank down and hugged my jacket, grateful for its warmth. I slipped into a deep sleep, whispering to myself that everything would be okay. I clung to the faint hope that when I woke up, it would all be just a dream. Morning arrived, the trees filled with the cheerful song of birds. I jolted awake, my head still resting on my backpack. The sight of the smoldering campfire proved my worst fear right. It was real. A gasped, panic seizing them as the precious fire threatened to go out. I scrambled to shove on more wood and sighed with relief. That was a close call. I turned and headed the opposite way from yesterday, searching for anyone who could help. I needed more firewood as I scratched at the itchy insect bites on my arm. I forced my way through the thick undergrowth, my resolve hardening with every step. Suddenly I froze, my eyes wide. I thought, stunned. I had emerged onto a high cliff, the world dropping away into an endless, empty ocean. The crushing realization slammed into me. I was trapped on a deserted island. I couldn't spot any mainland, only small islands scattered on the distant horizon. A sudden rustle in the bushes behind me made me spin around. "Who's there?" I sat listening intently, my gaze fixed back toward the forest. A pair of legs stepped out from the trees. "Why?" I whispered to myself. Why was this happening to me? I was only here for my sister. I never wanted to go to the fireworks, and now I was stuck here. I wondered why I'd even bothered with the fire. Oh, right, to survive. I stood there with a blank stare, the weight of it all pressing down on me. My search for a way out brought me to a stunning waterfall, its waters pouring down in a glittering, tumbling rush. I couldn't believe the island could hide a place this beautiful. When I saw bubbles rising in the pool, I realized I'd found a source of water. I couldn't help but notice the new strategic spot sat almost right beside my first camp. A small smile tugged at my lips as I wondered if my luck was changing. I moved my camp here, hoping the smoke would catch the eye of any passing ship. When I realized this was going to be a long ordeal, I started sawing logs to build a shelter. I panted with exertion as I hauled the heavy logs through the woods. I decided to build a proper home and set to work, driving sharpened stakes deep into the earth. I drove a post deep into the earth, telling myself it would be sturdy enough. Worry gnawed at me about whether the structure would hold, so I decided to add more pillars. I ate a quiet meal beside a small fire in my half-finished hut. I stared at my last bento, my stomach dropping as I realized I had to find a new food source. A sudden noise from the bushes outside made me jump in alarm. I peeked out from my shelter, heart pounding as I sensed a beast nearby. I told myself it was either a boar or a rabbit, took a steady breath, and forced myself to finish the walls. I lay sprawled on my makeshift bed, utterly spent and craving nothing more than a simple bath. Morning came again, the sky alive with the sound of birds. My heart leapt when I found a river alive with schools of fish. I waded into the cool water, splashing as I reached out and tried to catch one. I raised my prize high, grinning wide and triumphant. All right. He wades into the shallow river, surprised to find the fish are almost too easy to catch. His first catch sizzles and crackles, roasting over the hastily built fire he threw together. He takes a huge, satisfying bite, savoring his first real meal in this new world. Chewing slowly, he sits in his shelter, longing for a pinch of salt to bring some flavor. He turns to the spring, sipping its cool water to save his dwindling stash of bottled drinks. As he drifts off, he promises himself he'll work hard on his house tomorrow. He sinks to his knees, digging a trench around his hut to keep the rain at bay. He worked slowly and carefully, smearing thick, wet mud over the wooden frame of his shelter. Wiping his brow, he swells with pride at the steady progress he's made. He plans the roof, deciding to rig a vinyl sheet into a makeshift window. The dense forest canopy hung over him, offering a generous roof of branches and leaves. He builds a fire in the stone-lined hearth, channeling its warmth straight into his HUD. He sits inside, a satisfied smile on his face. He's built a shelter that keeps the rain out. He feels the stone's gentle heat, a small but sure defense against the cold nights. A bold, ambitious idea blooms in his mind. Next, he will build a bath. He stares at the small stone pool he built, telling himself it will be enough. He grips two long sticks like makeshift tongs and yanks a searing hot rock from the fire. He steps in to help as the hot stones burst apart the moment they hit the cold water. He tells himself to be more careful with the fragile hot rocks. He sinks into the steaming water, a deep, blissful sigh of contentment escaping him. As he relaxes, he dreams of a steaming stew. He's so tired of plain grilled fish. He can't help but notice the autumn leaves, a clear sign that the seasons are changing. He shivers in the bath, feeling the air grow colder with every passing moment. His handmade earthenware pot bubbles merrily, steam curling up as the campfire crackles below. He sips his stew, quietly yearning for knowledge to widen the meager diet of his mind. The once vibrant forest surrenders its color as winter's chill creeps in. He stands before his finished hut, a sturdy, silent monument to his survival. He smiles, pride swelling. It's not perfect, he knows, but it's a success. He looks up and sees snow has already blanketed the distant mountain peak. He trudges through the first snowfall, the biting cold a stark, serious new threat. He spots mushrooms sprouting from a log and freezes, unsure if they're safe. He wisely holds back from eating them, knowing the risk would be far too great. Night settles over his lonely hut, the lone spark of life in the vast wilderness. His axe splits the firewood with a sharp crack that echoes through the cold, silent air. Huddled inside, he guards the small fire like a lifeline. Every careful breath a fight to keep the cold at bay. His breath billows into the cold air as a sudden thrill settles over him. Snow will soon fall here. He frets the fish are growing scarce, haunted by thoughts of his shrinking food stores. He wonders how much longer he can keep going, how much longer he'll survive. A sudden noise from inside his hut snaps his eyes wide open and fills him with alarm. A brilliant streak of light sliced through the darkness of his small shelter. He sits by the dying embers, startled as a sudden, strange, unexplained thing occurs. A chilling thought slips into his mind. Is he finally going to die here? He curls into himself, hugging his knees as the crushing weight of his utter loneliness buries him. A zipping orb of light appears, its high-pitched voice screaming frantic apologies. He flinches back, bewildered, as the light circles him and softly apologizes for his predicament. The orb of light cried out that he'd been swept up in a hero summoning. Then it tells him, this is no longer the world he knows. He can only stand there, eyes wide in absolute shock, his mind unable to make sense of the words. The orb repeats its impossible message, and his new terrifying reality snaps into place like a cold, unshakable truth. He glares at the orb, voice breaking as he asks if he was really just collateral damage. He claws at the light, demanding to be sent back, but the light only tells him it can't. The orb whispers that the summoning was meant for those teetering on the brink of death. He fights to make sense of it, repeating again and again that this can't be his world. He demands to know what this place is, his face a mask of confusion. The orb floods him with a vision of a fantasy world, quietly asking, is this it? He insists he's seen no monsters, then asks if it's a spirit. The spirit explains it was once a god, until the summoning drained its power. It proudly claims its power bounced back fast, even though it's still weak. The spirit whispers that the summoning's whole purpose was to open a fleeting bridge between the two worlds. It rambles on about complex ideas of becoming a god, leaving him utterly baffled. The spirit reveals the hero candidates were 3 humans standing at death's door. It apologizes again, voice small and hurried, saying it didn't notice he was caught up with him. He gasps, shouting in disbelief as he realizes the summoned hero is his manipulative older sister. A cold, grim truth hits him. He must have been about to die too. He thinks back and a cold truth hits him. The human world itself had been in some kind of trouble. Suddenly, a group of powerful, godlike figures appears before him. He finds himself hemmed in by a pantheon of gods, their presence so immense it crushes him. The tiny Orpanics clung to one of the gods, begging them not to reveal their secret. The god, the Fun, tells the panicked door in a cold, stern voice that it is too late. Buffon decides he'll deal with the boy's fate later, ignoring the orb's pleas. The young goddess Mishit steps forward as the orb shivers and turns into a wolf. The spirit says Rish failed, so the summoning has spread far beyond its intended range. He points an accusing finger at the spirit for the mistake, but the spirit instantly refuses to take the blame. Fafon glared, silencing their bickering and snapping that they'd deal with it later. Old goddess Val fixed him with a long, burning stare and asked which of the assembled gods he will choose. Fafon explains he has to choose a patron god if he wants to survive in this strange new world. They will grant him powers and tools carved out of the little life he has left. The faun steps forward, eyes burning with strange fire, and declares himself the god of power, fire, destruction, and rebirth. The same dark-haired man fixes you with a steady look and names himself Roardale, of earth, silence, and magic. The old man, his long white beard flowing, is Gackle of order and magic. A solemn young boy steps forward and declares he is the child of water and healing. That kind-faced old woman was Val, the goddess of the earth and of his harvest. With a bright grin, the cheerful young Misha introduces herself as the goddess of light and wind. The beautiful blonde, her alpha, is the goddess of light, love, and beauty. Haralpur explains, his voice tight, that Rish, the wolf, has been drained of nearly all his power. He glares at the weakened spirit, irritated by how overconfident it had been before. He asked, voice tight, if the powers of the various gods overlapped. Buffon says many beings came, yet only the strongest are still here. He's torn, heart pounding. Which of these powerful gods should he choose? He stares at the gathered gods, heart pounding, and wonders if he must choose every one of them. Gull explains that choosing everyone would make their powers seep into each other and grow weak. He shook his head. If the gods couldn't stand one another, cooperation was all but impossible. How strong the blessing he receives will be depends on how compatible he is with the god. I should explain how relationships, love, friendship, or obsession, reshape the power. He's utterly lost, can't keep up with the tangled web of divine rules. Galad urges him to really think about what he wants to achieve in this world. He wonders to himself, what does he truly want to accomplish? He just wants a comfortable life, free of any obligations he doesn't want. His burning wish is to have absolutely nothing to do with his sister. He aches for the power to roam this new world freely, without chains or limits. Me should explain his sister's fierce sense of justice. He knows she turns it into a weapon. Gallic makes it painfully clear. His power grows only when his sister is active. He burst out, his voice shaking with panic as he asked what kind of powers the gods had given his sister. When he learns she has all magic and domination, a deep dread claws at his chest. Seeing his desperation, the god Gockle stirs and prepares to grant him a power perfectly suited to his plight. Gully lists a host of skills, finishing with Severance in the ominous Hero Slayer. He lets that terrifying name sink into him, but in the end he accepts the god's offer. They stand together in the silent dark forest, the starry sky sparkling above them. Gal hands him a magnificent decapitation sword, a blade essential to his survival. The god of a fan presses a heavy pouch of gold into his hands for his new life. Mishit presses a tiny bag into your hand. Inside is a powder that will make plants grow faster. Gali feels he should be the one to thank the boys for their understanding. The little wolf spirit Rish sleeps peacefully in the snow, its body twitching. He turned to the gods and asked if he could take the vulnerable little wolf with him. He explains, voice low and determined, that since Rish is powerless, he'll be the one to protect it. He strokes the sleeping wolf with a gentle hand and whispers how happy he is to have it. The spirit exhales a soft, scenting sound, accepting its new master. Buffon begins the transfer, his voice tight with warning as he tells him to be careful with his new abilities. He swept in with grand flair and vowed to live a peaceful, comfortable life. He looks around at the vast, snowy landscape, utterly struck by its sheer beauty. The manor sits snug in a valley, a small village just visible in the distance. He stands in wonder at the breathtaking scenery, feeling an odd, gentle warmth in the air despite the snow. He can't help thinking it's not a house at all, it's a mansion. He catches his reflection in the mirror and freezes, staring in shock at his suddenly younger face. Cradling Rish, he stares in disbelief, wondering what could have done this to his face. He blushes, realizing God chose his new appearance from 3 youthful options. He peeks around the corner, cautious and tense, still reeling from the sudden changes to his body. He steps into the entrance hall, his breath catching at the sight of the fine stone floors. A grand staircase with a wooden banister sweeps up to the manor's upper floors. The living room feels inviting, centered around a fireplace and a plush, tufted armchair. The kitchen was rustic and warm, yet fully equipped. A massive brick oven anchored the room and broad countertops waited for work. He stands in a spacious library, wide-eyed as he marvels aloud at the room's enormous size. He peeks into another room, his chest tightening with curiosity as he wonders what else this grand house might be hiding. He stumbles into a huge pantry, its shelves piled high with food, and stands speechless. Cradling Rish, he recognizes the familiar foods and feels like he's floating through a dream. He stumbles upon a huge wooden barrel brimming with live trout and salmon, their silver bodies darting and flashing as they swim inside. Seeing those familiar fish, he can't shake the thought that they might be connected to his old world. After months of starvation, his stomach let out a loud growl at the sight of so much food. He stares at his grimy hands and winces, deciding he must take a bath before he eats. He eases into the hot, steaming water of the clawfoot tub and lets out a deep, slow sigh. Submerged in the warmth, he's flooded with a deep, quiet happiness and a gentle peace. Puzzled about how to polish rice, he can't resist testing his new divine skills. Now dressed, he stands before a large wooden watermelon, ready to get to work. He fixes his stare, and for the first time activates his powerful appraisal skill. He instantly understands how the mill works, eyes wide and amazed at his sudden new knowledge. The heavy wooden mill rumbles as it begins to grind, its massive weight pressing down on the grain. He finds rich sound asleep in the wicker basket he prepared for the spirit. He remembers Rish giving itself to him, and he'll keep it alive with his power. He strokes the sleeping wolf gently, promising to bring it meat once it recovers. In the kitchen, he skillfully slices a head of cabbage into thin, precise slivers. He showers the thick sirloin with freshly ground pepper, seasoning it generously. The seasoned steak crashed onto the hot pan, erupting into a loud, satisfying sizzle. He flips the steak with a practiced flick and confesses he secretly craves that strange combination. He reflects on the island's monotonous meals, nothing but fish day after day. He lifts the lid of the wooden pot, and a warm cloud of steam swirls up to unveil perfect, fluffy white rice. The finished meal sits on the plate like a jewel, sparkling with the promise of deliciousness. He clasps his hands together and bows his head, offering a heartfelt prayer of thanks for the food. He cuts into the thick, juicy steak, knife and fork poised, ready to eat. He lifts the first perfect juice-dripping bite of steak to his mouth. The flavor hits him, and all he can manage is a single, amazed word: delicious. He savors the juicy meat, the fluffy rice, and the crisp cabbage, a perfect combination. Sitting alone at the large table, a deep, shocked truth hits him. He has survived. He melts into the soft, cozy bed, a luxury he hasn't felt in months. As he drifts off, he lets out a grateful sigh, no longer afraid his fire will go out. He accepts his new reality, knowing he'll now live in this unknown world. The next morning he wakes up and thinks the bed is almost too soft to sleep in. The sun climbs over the roof of his new manor, waking everything to the bright hush of a new day. A week later, he's out in the yard, hanging the laundry to dry with slow, steady hands. He slept through most of the week, his body slowly mending from the island's harsh life. Now feeling rested, he finishes his laundry and grins, satisfied. In the kitchen, his skills light up with recipe ideas for every ingredient. He pauses, tempted to make ramen, a nostalgic bowl that pulls memories from his old world. He's got kelp, but his face falls as he realizes there's no way to grind the wheat into flour. He eyes the sacks of wheat, knowing he can't use them until they're milled. A humble, comforting meal of grilled fish, steaming soup, and plain rice sat waiting on the table. He opts for a simple meal, savoring the familiar, comforting flavors. Determined, he promises himself he'll go shopping for containers to store the flour once he mills it. He unfurls the huge, intricately detailed map the gods gave him, fingers tracing routes as he plans his first trip. He sweeps his gaze across the map, desperately trying to find the area the gods had pointed out. He finds his destination, activates his transference skill, and in a blink is transported straight there. He appears on a hill, the walled city of Kassam spread out before him. He recognizes the frontier city of Kassam on the map, thanks to his strange, gifted knowledge. He's well aware Kassam is a bustling hub where adventurers gather to hunt the monsters lurking in the nearby forest. At the city gate, a guard stepped forward and asked to see his identification and travel permit. He explains his situation, feeling the other adventurer's eyes boring into him. He wonders whether it is the new clothes or that divinely altered face that's making him stand out. With his new hooded cloak on, he feels like he can explore without anyone noticing. He picked up some rough spun cloth at the market stall, running his fingers over the coarse weave and grimacing at how poor it was. In the general store, he wanders the aisles, eyes roaming over rows of goods waiting to be bought. As he shops, he finds the items he needs, each one making him think of his companion Rish. He clutches his pouch of coins like a lifeline, knowing it's a large sum given to him by the gods. His eyes snap to a strangely shaped ornate bottle on a nearby shelf. He stares at the elegant bottle and instantly knows it's a potion, the same kind you always find in video games. He decides to call on his appraisal skill to find out what ingredients it contains. He walks past a food stall, eyes bright with curiosity about the flavors of this new world. When he uses appraisal on the sausages, a sickening vision of writhing bacteria floods his mind and makes him recoil. He flinches at the sight of a ladle being used at a nearby stall. He spots a shot of a magnificent grape trellis and decides to go look for farm tools. He edges up to the shopkeeper, eyes locked on a pitchfork and a crate, and asks to buy it. He asks the woman, his voice full of hope, if he could also take a small cutting from the grapevine. Nearly finished with his shopping, he suddenly spotted the weapons shop. The kind shopkeeper noticed his new face and gently suggested he buy some leather armor. He pictured himself sweltering in metal armor under the summer sun, and instantly tossed the idea aside. He smiled softly and thanked the old woman warmly, touched by her helpful advice. Entering the weapons shop felt like being thrust into a video game world. He drew his blade, sure it would be the easiest to swing. Sizing up the other weapons got too confusing, so he stuck with his own. He bought goat monster leather armor, a pouch, and a large sack. As dust settled over the town, the day's exhaustion sank into him. He sank down by the gate, deciding not to use transference out in the open. It was time to pull himself back into his usual manner, stow his gear, and check on Rish. Under a sky full of stars, he made up his mind. Tomorrow he'd go to the Adventurers Guild. The next day he stood before the large timber-framed guild hall, its wooden beams looming overhead. The tavern buzzed around him as he pushed through and stepped up to the counter to register. The receptionist laid out the registration options, and he chose to pay the fee. She fussed with his tag as he spoke up, saying he had one more request. While waiting, he pulled a thick, time-worn book from a nearby shelf. He hungrily began reading about the Forest of Monsters, a valuable resource. It mapped the local terrain and spelled out exactly how to put monster parts to use. A cheerful "yo" cut into his reading as a figure approached. A burly adventurer rumbled. "Are you the one seeking an escort mission?" He swallowed hard and explained he was just a novice, desperate to learn from a safe party. The man, Dean, a silver-rank adventurer, introduced himself as his guide. The protagonist's jaw dropped. A silver ranker actually taking such a simple quest. Carried away by the moment, he went along with the day's plan. He realized he was being swept along completely by Dean's fierce, driving energy. A girl with twin tails stormed up, shouting at Dean not to decide things alone. Dean waved off her complaints with a careless shrug, telling her not to be so picky. The protagonist bristled, annoyed as he realized it was the guild's favorite, painfully tedious noble quest. He tried to tell them he didn't want to be dragged into their drama. The girl snapped at Dean, furious that their partner Chris kept getting all the good jobs. From the side, she threw the protagonist a pleading look. Dean protested, his voice tight. He didn't want to be tied down to the guild. He stood with his arms crossed, stubbornly refusing to be tied down to a single partner. Emil leaned in, her smile soft and her voice sweet as she asked for his cooperation. She explained they were siblings and that he was being far too indulgent. Another girl, Kina, popped up, shouting the name of Emil and sounding fed up. Kina calmly told Dean, "This is what happens when you spoil your sister." She reminded him, soft and sharp at once, that he was free to refuse the guild's chosen escort. The protagonist apologized to Kina, mortified by the embarrassing scene they were making. The word siblings hit him like a punch, and his sister rushed back into his mind. He told the stunned Dean he was canceling his escort request. Amo, completely misunderstanding, lit up with a bright grin and thanked him profusely. She assumed he'd find another party for her, but he shot that down in an instant. He turned to the receptionist and said he didn't need the escort anymore. Dean cried out, stunned by the sudden shift in his plans. The receptionist apologized for the commotion and quickly offered to give him his money back. He asked, hopeful, if he could have the adventurer's handbook instead of a refund. He walked away from the guild, the building standing stark against the sky. Out in the street, he breathed a weary sigh of relief. He swore that in this world he wouldn't put up with any messy sibling drama. A playful, otherworldly voice whispered, asking why he wasn't using severance. The goddess Misha appeared before him, her voice a hush as she reminded him that only he could see her. She told him to be aware that she and the other spirits were watching him. He couldn't tell if she was being simple, but she kept insisting he just pay attention. She grinned cheekily and suggested he might be thinking naughty thoughts, and he denied it flatly. He worried that relying on his severance skill too often would come back to haunt him. Mission explained that the skills affect weekends across a wider area of targets. He couldn't help but wonder aloud whether the power truly faded the more targets it struck. She made it clear. It reaches everyone around the target, and they all shy away from the topic. She winked and told him he could use it, if only he remembered. He met her gaze and whispered his thanks for the advice. She gave him a warm, contented smile, pleased to have helped. As she vanished, a soft gust of wind rose up where she'd stood. He couldn't shake the thought that some god had turned their gaze on him, even though he had no power. He walked up to the city gate, heart pounding, ready to step alone into the forest of monsters. The guard eyed the new adventurer's tag and, satisfied, waved him through. He left the shelter of the city's towering stone walls and stepped into the wild. He checked the handbook. It said Monsters Roam was just outside the gate. He read that the creatures he was about to face were known to have horns. The book's pages were full of rabbit illustrations, some with little horns, others with none at all. Alone at last, he decided it was time to test his blade. He summoned his weapon, the words decapitation sword pounding in his mind. A cold realization struck him. His storage skill could hide anything, but not living creatures. A sudden rustle in the tall grass grabbed his attention. He turned and there, stepping out of the brush, was a large white rabbit. The rabbit froze, its nose twitching as it stared at him. He relaxed for a heartbeat, sure it was just an ordinary animal. In an instant, the rabbit's face snapped vicious and it lunged at him. "Whoa!" he shouted, stumbling back as the creature's ferocious attack slammed toward him. He saw the dark, bean-sized horns clustered around its eyes. A sudden jolt hit him. He realized this was a hornless monster. He swung his sword on pure instinct, the blade striking with a solid thwack. His eyes went wide in shock at how effortlessly his strike landed. He'd cut the creature down with a single clean swing. He couldn't help but wonder how a regular sword from the shop would have fared. Another rabbit dropped beneath his blade with effortless ease. It hit him. Even a plain sword would have been enough against this horned foe. He gazed out into this forest as a rush of newfound confidence settled over him. He stumbled on a cluster of herbs and, eyes sharp, used his appraisal skill to identify them. Discovering wild raspberries, he grinned with delight at the forest's generous bounty. He smiled to himself, thrilled at how incredibly useful his skills were. A swirl of magic beside the tree trunk caught his eye. He felt a jolt of recognition. The mushrooms were the same kind he'd seen on the island. His appraisal skill confirmed they were edible, and a cold wash of regret sank over him. A sudden crushing dread washed over him, snapping him into high alert. He felt the presence of a monster nearby, something far bigger than a rabbit. He snapped his head around, shock written all over his face. From the trees, a massive, horned, bear-like creature let out a low, rumbling growl at him. The horn bear reared up on its hind legs and let out a bone-chilling roar. His eyes went wide with shock as he realized he was facing a large, horned monster. The dense forest canopy loomed high above the scene below. He looked around the clearing, still trying to process everything that had just happened. He froze, staring down at the fallen bear, breathless with awe at his sword's terrifying power. Suddenly, the goddess Misha appeared, her voice sharp as she asked why he wasn't using magic. He scolded her for the surprise, but she just giggled and apologized sweetly. He admitted he'd forgotten about magic. He'd convinced himself he didn't need it. Mischutz grinned and suggested he try searching for monsters without having to walk around. She flashed a cheerful smile and urged him to put his explorer's instincts to the test. It hit him. He'd received so many abilities that he hadn't even processed them all. He locked his thoughts into a single point and for the first time activated the exploration skill. A targeting radical shimmered into his vision, locking onto a distant rabbit. He thought ruefully how much easier things would have been if he'd used this sooner. When Misha asked what magic he'd use, it pushed him to ask about his attributes. She grinned and rattled off the divine elemental attributes that were now his to command. The horned rabbit they'd been after sprang from the undergrowth and barreled straight at him. He shut his eyes, drew a steady breath, and pictured the spell he was about to cast. He shot his hand forward and unleashed a powerful wind-slash attack. An invisible blade of wind whipped through and struck the rabbit, felling it in an instant. He stared at his hand, eyes wide, disbelief melting into joy as he realized the magic had worked. The defeated rabbit at his feet, he spun toward Michoud and thanked her for her help. She warned him to be careful. Magic users had all but vanished. A small whirlwind spun up when he used his skill to store the carcasses. He made up his mind to sell his haul as soon as he moved near the city gate. He stared at his massive haul, wondering how on earth he would get it to the guild. He arrived at a huge timber-framed building that stood as a bustling purchasing center. He stepped up to the counter and, in a quiet, polite voice, asked the man to value his goods. Utterly shocked, the shopkeeper let the enormous sack of kills slip from his hands. The man couldn't help but marvel at his incredible strength, so out of place with how he looked. He replayed how he'd neatly butchered the creatures before bringing them in. The shopkeeper led him into a back room packed with hanging monster carcasses. He knew his mental resistance skill was the thin shield keeping this gruesome sight from crushing him. He remembered how, on the island, gutting fish had been as far as he could go. The man praised his strong arms and the clean, skillful way he processed the hides. He refused to go to the Adventurers Guild, even when they dangled more money. A dark look slid over his face as he remembered the chaotic adventure with his siblings. He swallowed his nerves and asked the shopkeeper where he could learn to brew potions. The man explained how the guild worked, then leaned in and offered to sell him the recipe outright. The boy swallowed and agreed to the deal, his mind clear on the man's offer. He held the newly acquired potion recipe, its letters looping in an unfamiliar script that set his heart racing. He was stunned to find recipes for everything from cork suddenly so easy to find. He skimmed the instructions and couldn't believe how easy making potions looked. He decided brewing potions was the best way to hide his healing touch. The shopkeeper called after him just as he was about to leave. The man's eyes lit up as he asked if he'd found a magic stone and offered to appraise it. His eyes went wide as realization hit, the mention of magic stones flashing back into his mind. The man held a tiny glittering red gem, the monster's spirit frozen into crystal. He named it a valuable red spinel and congratulated him on the find. The boy who had thought it was just a pebble stared in surprise and mumbled a bewildered, "Thank you." The man offered to buy it, eyes gleaming as he spoke of its potential for mighty fire magic. He agreed to sell in a heartbeat. He could still use magic without it. Dusk fell, swallowing the half-timbered buildings of Kassam in shadow. He decided to roam the town, eager to snag a quick meal before night fell. He wandered the streets, soaking up the strange new sights and sounds. He found himself in a bustling evening market, every stall and alley buzzing with life. He couldn't help staring at stalls piled high with wheels of cheese. Other vendors held up cured salamis and long strings of plump sausages. He spotted hearty sandwiches bursting with what looked like shredded cabbage. He couldn't help but notice bread piled with sauerkraut, sausage, ham, and cheese was everywhere. He aimed his appraisal skill at the sausages sizzling on a grill. They looked perfectly cooked, he thought, and he ordered one from the vendor. He sank a big, satisfying bite into the hot grilled sausage. He mused that the greasy, high-calorie food was perfect for adventures. Bins overflowing with all sorts of dried fruit caught his eye. Curious, he bought a small bag and popped a piece into his mouth. He jumped back in shock, exclaiming how unbelievably sour it was. It hit him. This was probably an ingredient for sweets or for savory meat dishes. He couldn't help but notice a woman at another stall selling something that looked like brown sugar. He was enchanted by the vintage look of the balance scale she used. The heady smell of alcohol hit him, and he couldn't help but wonder what the legal drinking age was. He kept walking through the bustling market, a simple, warm joy spreading through him. The commotion up ahead grabbed his attention, and he couldn't help wondering what was going on. He craned his neck, straining to catch a glimpse of whatever was stirring up all the excitement. He saw a massive, whole-roasted pig sizzling over a large fire pit. His eyes sparkled with excitement at the dazzling spread of dishes. He watches, breath held, as the vendor's expert hands carve the succulent meat into perfect slices for sandwiches. He eagerly bought one of the steaming, freshly made roast pork sandwiches. He clutched a thick sandwich, his mouth watering at how unbelievably delicious it looked. He took a huge, eager bite, and the flavors burst like fireworks in his mouth. Munching happily, he announced he'd definitely found a winner. He savored the juicy pork, mouth watering as he planned to roast one himself at home. He looked up at the starry sky and quietly decided he'd go get a pig later on. Later that night, his grand manor stood hushed beneath a sky blazing with stars. He returned home, softly greeting the dozing curl nestled in its basket. He realized with a quiet surprise that his stomach had shrunk since his time on the island. He excitedly told the spirit about his successful day of hunting and the money he'd earned. Rich let out a tiny, sleepy whimper when he heard his voice. A soft, warm glow poured from his hand as he reached for Rich. He knew his healing magic was useless against Rich's magical exhaustion. He whispered a gentle wish, hoping the tiny, fragile spirit would heal soon. Preparing for bed, he softly whispered goodnight to his new, peaceful home. The next morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight dappling the trees. He eased into his seat and welcomed a simple, time-honored breakfast of fish, rice, and soup. As he led, he couldn't shake the thought that the costume's fabric was cheap. He decided to put his language skill to use. He would read the local books. A smile tugged at his lips as he decided to visit the royal capital that very day. When he arrived, he stood stunned, staring at the capital's vast, overwhelming size. He stepped up to the city guard and, voice small, explained it was his first time visiting. The guard smiled kindly and pressed a plain, folded map of the city into his hands. The guard warned him, voice low and urgent, that the commercial guild might try to take advantage of him. A city guard can't help but muse that the wandering child in the plaza might offer directions. He thanked the guard and handed over his coins for a map of the magnificent royal capital. As he walked away, the guard called after him one last time. The guard offered a clear, helpful tip for finding a guide in the city. Surprised by the guard's kindness, Jean thanked him again from the heart for his advice. He slipped into the capital, holding his breath and hoping to dodge any trouble in this strange new city. He noticed how cramped the city's architecture was, the buildings pressed tightly together. Following the map, he finally stood in the central plaza he'd been searching for. The guard's words snapped back into his mind. Find a man named Leon by the well. He caught sight of a figure with a long ponytail sitting on the edge of the well. He crept closer to the figure, every nerve tense, and asked if their name was truly Leon. The person's hostile reaction made him jump back, his heart pounding with shock and fear. Leon shot him a sharp, menacing glare, his eyes burning with intense irritation. The man snapped out his name, his aggressive tone terrifying Joan. Terrified and tongue-tied, he stammered out a plea for a tour of the city. He explained that it was a city guard who'd recommended him. Leon bristled, even more annoyed, when he learned a guard had sent the boy. A sick doubt twisted inside him. Had he been tricked, or was this the wrong person? Leon let out a heavy sigh and against his will agreed, telling himself it was fate. As they walked together, Jean asked, curious, if there were any must-see sights. Land suggested the view from the castle outshone every other in the capital, but he quickly added with a warning, commoners were forbidden from entering the castle grounds. John couldn't wrap his head around why he'd recommend a place that was off-limits. He asked instead for recommendations on shops or places to eat. Leon's expression darkened the moment he said he had to get to a famous restaurant. John couldn't figure out why his simple questions made his guide so angry. They walked along the cobblestone streets, their footsteps ringing through the alley. As they continued their tour, Jean couldn't help but notice something strange about the city. He couldn't help but ask why every house was squeezed so close together, standing shoulder to shoulder. He leaned forward, voice low, and asked about all the different taxes the citizens had to pay. Leon rattled off the citizen tax, the traffic tax, and the peculiar glass tax. They put a tax on glass. Windows were a luxury only the wealthy could afford. He realized he'd hardly seen any glass windows or anything to consume either. He pointed at the towering building and realized it was a church for the spirits. Inside was a beautiful courtyard fountain, a peaceful little spot where spirits loved to gather. He realized that in this land, people treated spirits like gods. Leon stopped in his tracks, a thoughtful expression flickering across his face for a moment. He apologized, admitting he should have shown Jean the proper tourist spots. Seeing that softer side, Jane couldn't help thinking his guide wasn't such a bad person. But even the simplest compliments seemed to spark Leon into another angry mood. His voice fell low and menacing, and when he said, "young master," the words dripped with sarcasm. Suddenly a sharply dressed older man appeared and spoke to Leon as if they were old friends. Jean stared at the newcomer, curiosity prickling as she tried to figure out who this distinguished-looking man could be. He noticed the man's formal clothes and couldn't help but wonder why he'd called Leon young master. Leon made it clear that note was the butler for the entire Adelheid family. He snapped, demanding to know why the butler had suddenly appeared in the plaza. Note's face went cold as he revealed that an assassin was hunting Leon. A woman in a military uniform arrived, her voice tight with urgency as she urged them to leave the city immediately. Leon saw the woman and his pulse jumped. Lilith, another person, swept into the chaos. She jabbed toward the waiting carriage, insisting they make their escape this instant. But Leon planted his feet, stubbornly refusing to flee from the danger. The butler kept his voice steady and tried to paint the escape as a strategic retreat. Losing patience, Lilith grabbed Leon's arm and hauled him toward the carriage. She slammed the pommel of her sword into his stomach so fast he folded and hit the ground. Note grabbed the breathless Leon, lamenting that they were wasting precious time. For a single heartbeat, Lilith felt a sharp pang of remorse for the violent but necessary act she'd just done. She burst out, demanding to know why they weren't using a potion to heal him. Jean could see Leon was still in terrible pain. He stood utterly lost, swept into a drama he couldn't begin to understand. Lily saw the crowd swelling and urged them to move quickly before they drew any attention. Standing by the carriage, John knew he had to step forward and offer his help. He held out his homemade potion to the wounded Leon and his companions, a small vial of hope. It was only a prototype, but his appraisal skill gave the all-clear. It was safe to use. Lily stared at the strange boy, her voice tight as she asked who he was and why he'd helped. He introduced himself as Jean, saying he was just out on a city tour. Note told Lilith they were on their way to a shop. Lily's frowned at the new information, turning it over in her mind as she tried to make sense of the situation. She grabbed Jean's wrist without hesitation and yanked him toward the waiting carriage. Inside the carriage, be sure to gently give Jean's potion to the groaning Leon. Leon tilted the vial back and swallowed the healing liquid in one swift gulp. The potion hit him fast, and the pain that had twisted his face began to melt away. Sheen watched anxiously, his heart pounding, hoping his potion would work correctly. Now recovered, Leon met Jean's gaze and thanked him from the bottom of his heart for coming just in time. All Jean wanted was to be let go, his shopping trip completely forgotten. Leon looked down, still reeling from the painful blow. Dizzy and confused, he asked where they were, and Note informed him they were inside. He protested, insisting that even while exiled, he had done nothing to deserve being forced to run. Lilith explained, voice tight, that his younger brother was the one causing the danger right now. It looked like his brother had committed yet another crime, making everything even messier. Jean felt completely lost, desperate to piece together the tangled threads of the family's drama. Note pleaded with his master to fall back, stunned that he'd chosen to be the guide. Finally, the carriage eased to a stop in front of an elegant building. Note cried out urgently to his young master, calling him by a different name. They slipped into a small tailor's shop, and Leon, quick as a flash, asked for some new clothes. He told Joan he was sorry their tour had been so violently interrupted. John urged them to hurry, but Leon just let the tailor handle everything. Earlier, Lilith approached Jean, introduced herself, and revealed her noble family name. She slipped a ring into his hand as a token and told him, "Stay away for now." He took the ring, a knot of doubt in his chest, unsure what the future would bring for his new acquaintances. He finally burst out and asked why they kept calling Adelheid young master, a male title. With a dramatic flourish, Adelheid revealed the truth. She was a woman. The revelation hit John like a blow. He froze, utterly speechless, his head spinning from the shock. Adelheid confessed, voice low, that her boyish manner and flat chest had caused all the confusion. Lilith flashed one last knowing wink and slipped out of the shop. A small note apologized for the trouble, softly assuring him the clothes were a gift. Alone in the opulent boutique, he couldn't help but wonder what sort of clothes they sold. He was instantly swarmed by maids, all leaning in and eager to take his custom order. He realized this was no ordinary clothing store. It was a high-end tailor. After the fitting, he was left utterly spent. He slipped into a quiet alley and at last decided it was time to leave the city. After a long day, Yain wearily uses his storage skill to tuck his purchases away. He'd bought sheets, a bed cover, and books, and decided to eat before going sightseeing. He sinks into his seat and tucks into a humble but deeply satisfying meal of meat and bread. Later, he slips into a quiet corner of the library and begins his studies. He declares he's back as he steps into his grand stone manor. Inside, he finds his spirit wolf Rish and reaches out to give the sleeping creature a soft, affectionate pat. Standing over Rish's basket, he decides it's time to dive into his new books. He sinks by the window, squinting to read in the candle's dim, flickering light. As darkness falls, he feels the candle's weak glow betray him. It's too faint for him to see. He mulls building a proper lamp, worrying over fuel and which materials will best reflect the light. The goddess Mission suddenly materialized and snapped at him for forgetting what he could do. She tells him to just picture the magic he needs, and he raises his finger. He narrows his mind to the single word light, and a glowing orb appears before him. Beaming, he exclaims how incredibly convenient this magical light is for reading. He leans back and replays the busy day in his head, a warm satisfaction settling over him at what he's gained. His thoughts snap to Adelheim, the stern-faced noble he'd met. He doesn't know what happened to her, but he sends up a silent prayer, hoping she's safe. Several months slip by, and his companion Rish sleeps peacefully in its basket. The little spirit wolf jerks awake, its eyes snapping open as a bright new energy surges through it. Rish has fully recovered and now happily walks beside Jean through the forest. Jean beams at his preserved foods, a quiet sign he's growing more self-sufficient. He's spent months getting his hands dirty, learning local crafts like cheesemaking and carpentry. With winter closing in, he plans to build a separate hut just for brewing potions. As he works, a tiny plant catches his eye and tugs at a buried memory. A sudden memory hits him, the cork tree seedling he bought, and he decides it's finally time to plant it. He gently tucks the tiny seedling into a patch of soft earth. He decides to use Mistshoot's gift, the magical powder that accelerates growth. He sprinkles shimmering dust over the freshly planted seedling. A thunderous crack rips the air as the plant surges upward, shooting into life at an impossible, dizzying pace. Jean watches, mouth agape, as the seedling balloons up before his eyes. He stands breathless and wide-eyed before the massive, fully grown tree that now towers over him. He remembers using that very same powerful powder on his grape trellis. It worked like a charm. He eyes the tree, sure it will provide excellent material, and already plans a trip to come and consume it. Before long, he's back in Qasim, the familiar frontier town humming with life. Tired of inns, he finally decides it's time to rent a proper house here. As he walks, he spots a lone handkerchief lying on the cobblestone street. He looks up to see the adventurer, her, thinking about a meal again. He can't help but remember that lately she's been making a name for herself selling potions. He decides to ignore her completely, walking past without a single word. It hits him. Buying tools without a local address would look suspicious. That encounter made up his mind. He's renting a house now. A real estate agent guides him to a property in a stone-walled alleyway. The agent tells us this brand new house is cheap and tucked away in a safe neighborhood. Gene can't help noticing that in this world the older, sturdier houses often turn out to be the best. He tells the agent he'll take the house. He plans to pitch in with the renovations. He dives headfirst into learning his new skills, starting with the hands-on art of cheesemaking. He then moves on to plastering, carefully spreading mortar across the stone wall with slow, steady strokes. He feels watched, men peeking from around the corner in scattered spots. Distant snow-capped mountains edge into view, quietly announcing that the seasons are changing. John feels the chill in the air as yet another townsperson complains about the cold. He overhears a meal nearby, its quiet lament slipping out, that she's running out of money. He tries to slip past her, hoping to dodge yet another tiresome interaction. She calls after him, rushing to catch up as he walks away. She asks if he's heading to the forest, warning him about the winter dangers. He thanks her for caring and tells her he is aware of the risks. She grabs his arm, holding him tight and insisting his life is worth more than any pile of money. He tells her firmly, "I'm not being reckless," and his stern tone startles her. She stumbles backward and lets out a sharp cry, faking that she'd lost her footing. Sitting on the ground, she winks and insists she simply tripped over. Tears gather in her eyes as she desperately tries to pass off her clumsy act. Jean walks away, baffled that her blatant attempts at manipulation don't affect him at all. He nears the city gate, and in an instant his path is cut off. He froze, startled to see Emil's brother, Dean, standing before him. Now the brother, he thinks, bracing himself for another confrontation. Dean's eyes snap to him. He's the same man from that chaotic first meeting at the Adventures Guild. He keeps apologizing, hands clasped tight in a raw, remorseful gesture. Dean says with a sigh that Kina, their party member, gave him a stern lecture. He admits their actions robbed the guild of a promising adventure. Jean falls silent, recognizing that Dean at least understands he's in the wrong. Dean confesses that a simple meal set it off, but she never meant any harm. Jean nods and accepts the apology, but he makes it clear there's one condition. Dean stares, confused, and asks him, what could the condition possibly be? John snapped at Dean, demanding he keep his sister from ever coming near him again. Dean gives a reluctant yes, his voice betraying a thin thread of hesitation. He asks Gina if she's sure, bragging about how cute his sister is. Jean gapes, utterly aghast at the man's powerful sister-complex filter. He snaps at Dean, blunt and clear. The meal's behavior is creepy and not his type. He pictures his ideal partner, someone quiet and reserved, just like Adelheid. He hesitates, thinks it over, and finally admits to himself that a touch of assertiveness would do him good. Dean shifts the subject with a quick smile and offers to show him where a rare herb grows. Jean's interest flared. He was planning to go gather herbs anyway. Dean gives a cheerful thumbs up, a clear sign they've struck a deal. Jean can't help musing that Dean seems like a normal guy, except for his obsession with his sister. The two of them step into the lush, sun-dappled forest, sunlight dancing through the leaves. Dean points at a plant, its leaves stretching out like long, sharp blades. He calls it kinko grass, the prized herb the wealthy use to flavor their wine. Jean can't stop wondering if it might taste earthy, while Dean recoils, finding the very thought disgusting. Dean suggests they hunt some rabbits to turn into their lunch. Jean realizes with a jolt that he can't use his magical transference or storage while Dean is nearby. They roasted skewered rabbit meat over a sturdy roaring campfire. As they eat, Jean tells Dean how impressed she is by his passion and his smooth, skillful fighting style. Dean teases him. Are you saying Gina's strong enough to hunt bears for a living? Jean brushes off the compliment, insisting it's just his arm strength. Dean narrows his eyes, skepticism sharp in his gaze as he wonders how he could be so strong. Jean makes a quiet, fierce promise to himself. One day he'll be bigger and stronger. Dean's teasing grin suddenly hardens into a focused, intense stare as he watches Jean. In an instant, he shot forward and pinned Jean to the ground. He can't help but point out that Jean's legs are just as incredible as his arms. A calm voice cuts through their scuffle as Adelheid steps out from the trees. Jean and Dean snap their heads up, eyes wide and stunned by how suddenly she appears. Gina freezes, stunned. It's Leora, and she can't help blurting, "Why are you here all of a sudden?" She says, cool and steady, that she's hunting a bear and is only stopping to get some water. Jean knows it would be a terrible mistake to say her name now. Dean asked if they knew each other, and Jean simply confirmed they did. She steps forward and says her name is Ash, asking them to call her that. Dean gives his name, and Gina lets out a relieved breath, glad she'd thought to use an alias. Ash vows she'll repay him for the potion, but he just shrugs off her worry. Dean beams and cheerfully shoves a skewer of lumpy cooked meatballs toward her. Grinning from ear to ear, he insists she should just eat it anyway. The unlikely trio settles around a small campfire at the water's edge, letting the warm glow draw them together. Dean Bowes of Bear Hunt steps up to pay for the potion, then leans in to ask about her expensive inn. Gina froze in shock when she realized that 1 gold coin a day would be a huge cost. They press her about where she's staying, and she confesses it's only a bare room with a single bed. She explains that the pink-haired guild receptionist recommended the Spartan accommodations. Jean and Dean both instantly picture the flashy, troublemaking Amel. Dean leaps to his sister's defense, fierce and burning, pointing at the inn as the cause of every problem. Jean watches frustrated as Dean's logic about his sister unravels into complete nonsense. He says his constant worry drives him to help, even going so far as to call the meal a sweet girl. Adelheid Cooley studies the back and forth, deducing Emil as his younger sister. Dean flinches, unsettled by the fierce, ever-present scowl on her face. She reveals something jaw-dropping. A spirit hovered near Amel. She explains that the spirit's mark now sits on Dean's forehead. Dean, confused and unable to see it, asks what she's talking about. John's convinced that if a spirit is truly here, he'll spot it in a heartbeat. Suddenly, a single delicate white flower sprouts from the top of Dean's head. Jean's cheeks puff out as he desperately fights to hold back a laugh. He tells the clueless Dean to stop giving him that serious look. He leans in, studying the blossom, thinking it looks more like a fake flower. Jean murmurs an apology and reaches toward the strange flower on Dean's head. He gives a sharp tug and tears the little flower free from its unlikely perch. The moment the flowers were removed, Dean's eyes rolled back into his head. Dean crumples hard to the ground as John blurts out a quick apology. Adelheid says the spirit's hold was cut, and it's like Jean can see. He confirms he can, his thoughts drifting to his own spirit companion Rish. Rich is shown a spirit, its influence tied to a gene that's usually kept suppressed so life stays normal. She is stunned to find that only her father shared this sight, and she suspects a bloodline trade. She says, voice low but firm. In her family, only she and her father can see them. She warns him to be careful. His powerful ability is coveted by many. John's face clouds with concern as he agrees he'll heed her important warning. Jean Glance crouches beside the unconscious Dean, eyes hard. He decides the man must be silenced, at least for now. He can't help thinking it'd be a joke if they left him. After all, he hasn't told them any secrets. Asha asks, "Were you worried my true identity would be discovered?" She asked if Dean was his friend. He confessed it was only their second meeting. Adelheid's face sinks into shadow, utterly stunned by his revelation. She reels, shaken as she realizes her own thought process mirrors Jones's exactly. Resting a weary hand on her head, she at last accepts it was her own misjudgment. Jean watches her, convinced she's the kind of person who draws bad luck. As they sit by the fire, Jean decides to toss out a new topic. She asks if he can see her spirit, and he blinks, wondering which one she means. A tiny bird lands on her head and starts pecking at her, insistently. Jean's jaw drops. He's stunned by how attached the little bird seems. As the bird continues its work, he asks if it's a dull, constant ache. He asks if it hurts. She answers without flinching that she's grown used to the egg. He can't help thinking that even a sharp pecking could, over time, settle into a dull, familiar ache. Jeanline is in, watching the tiny bird perched on her head with bright, curious eyes. He spots a strange band of light, like a halo around the bird's neck. He pins the creature with a steady stare and activates his unique appraisal ability. The result lays bare the spirit's plan to make her manly, and it knocks him speechless. He asks why she's endured this for so long, wondering what it's all for. She says it's meant to shape her into a fine heir, which makes him ask about a brother. She says her father was drunk when she was born, and John hilariously misunderstood what she meant. Her family lived and breathed martial skill, so her father gave her a spirit of strength. He feels the story is strange, unable to stop wondering whether mere strength alone makes a man. Her brow creases in confusion as she admits she doesn't know the contract's exact details. He urges releasing the spirit, saying it looks like it's suffering. Adelheid lowers his gaze, quietly agreeing with his assessment of the situation. She reveals it should have been released 2 years ago, but the mage fell ill. She turns to him, hope rising in her voice as she asks if he can free it. He figures he can handle the collar and suggests they give it a shot once they're back in town. She agrees with a thankful smile, promising a reward no matter what happens. He asks why she has no money, and she grins. Her simple solution is to hunt a bear. It hits him all at once. She came here to hunt a bear. From the clearing, a voice bursts out, loud and trembling with a heartfelt apology. Dean awakens, pours out frantic apologies as Adelheid explains he was only charmed. He suddenly realizes the spirit's glowing mark hit those nearest the ammo the hardest. Dean apologizes again, but Jean waves it off and says, "Don't worry about it now." Dean reveals his plan with a hard edge. He'll drag the mill to the spirit's branch to contain the chaos. A memory of his own search for a place like that hits Jean, and he asks if there's one nearby. Adelheid admits she doesn't know and quietly suggests they just listen for now. Spirit branches are sanctuaries, some tiny, some vast, where spirits can rest in peace. Dean says he has to race back into town right now to take care of the arrangements. Jean suggests a transport service for the bear, a phrase Dean has never heard. Ash clarifies. It's a service to help adventurers lug their heavy prey. He slides a note with the transport details into her hand. She accepts it gratefully. Jean hesitates for a heartbeat, then drops one last crucial condition. Dean Wings flashes a thumbs up, eyes steady, and promises to keep Jean's secret safe. Jean waves goodbye, a cold knot forming as he realizes Dean knew he had touched the spirit's mark. In a flash, Adelheid draws her sword, poised and ready for a fight. Jean keeps up with her, his blade flashing as he readies himself for the fight. A massive wolf slumps to the ground, felled by their lightning-fast attacks. She praises his efficient fighting style, and he accepts the compliment with a humble nod. He insists he's just copying her expert technique, using his own abilities. The transport driver screams in protest, shouting that the load is impossible to move. The driver strained under the weight, and told them to carry the rest themselves. From behind, the cart droops, nearly crushed under the huge weight of their haul. They came up empty on the bear, but Adelheid notes the wolf hunt paid off. She apologizes for the trouble, but he shrugs it off, a grin spreading as he's already hungry for the next challenge. Adelheid's voice tight with worry. She fears Dean might remain unconscious for several days. Jean looks over, voice tense as she asks where her loyal steward has gone. Note. She explains the notice on a separate task, and Jean sighs about his bossiness hangs heavy in the room. Jean opened his home to her and with a quiet hope, asked Adelheid if she would stay with him. The scene cuts to his rustic timber-framed rental house in Kasum. Inside, he greeted her with a warm smile, motioned to a nearby chair, and gently invited her to sit. Later, Adelheid warmly remarked on his good taste in fixing up the old house. He caught the faint, wild scent of the forest wolves clinging to her clothes. He hesitated, wondering out loud what to do about the bath, then decided he'd just ask her. He promised he'd have everything ready for her, and gently said, "Please wait." At the well, he wrinkled his nose and passed on the steam bath. It was just too dirty. Soon a hot bath stood ready, steam curling up as it beckoned beside the crackling hearth. From the stairs, he called down, "The bath's ready," and she thanked him. He decided to use this time to change his clothes and make the guest bed ready. Walking up the stairs, he couldn't help thinking how badly he wanted a bathtub. Later, a teapot and a few snacks sat waiting on the small table. A shiny metal teapot sat waiting, poised and gleaming, ready for their important discussion. Jean asked if they should begin the unsealing. A refreshed adult Hyde nodded in agreement. He stepped closer, and she said quietly and steadily that she was counting on him. His eyes narrowed, every bit of his focus locked on the difficult task. Rue, the tiny bird spirit, pecked insistently at Adelheid's temple, tapping with stubborn impatience. Adelheid murmured that the bird itself seemed unable to stop pecking at her. He saw he had to remove the glowing light clinging to its neck. The bird suddenly puffed up its chest, glowing with a restless, buzzing energy. A frantic cry burst out, and Adelheid wins from the spiritual backlash. He apologized as she suddenly slumped forward, overcome by the shock. He gasped in shock and caught her the moment she went limp and lost consciousness. The hand that had been clutching her chest fell away, limp and lifeless. Holding her close, he blinked in disbelief. Her chest was completely flat. He eased himself onto the bed, whispering softly to her still form. He hesitated, wondering if he should stop her from taking revenge on her father. He whispered gently to the exhausted little bird that it needed to rest, too. Adelheid and the spirit slept peacefully, side by side on the same pillow. John watched them, surprised at how quickly the unsealing had finished. He stayed behind, arranging the third floor for her while she slept. He threw himself into preparations, gathering books and other supplies. He brought a tray with a drink, just in case she woke up thirsty. He kept working, slowly turning the house into a cozier, more comfortable place to stay. In his usual manner, he called out for his spirit wolf companion, Rish. He apologized to the happy wolf for not giving it much attention lately. He tenderly scratched Rish's fluffy cheeks as it licked his hand. His thoughts snapped back to Qasim. Adelheid still lay motionless, not a hint of waking. Suddenly, he felt a mighty, godlike presence materialize right behind him. The goddess's mission appeared in Val, and the god Vaphon came with it. Jean froze in disbelief. asking why the deities had suddenly appeared in his home. The Fun wasted no time and said they had a request for him. Val asked, voice tight, if he would be willing to name the spirits who had fled there. Michaud explained his sister was using magic recklessly, so blind with it that she couldn't even see them. The Fawn burst out, saying her stubbornness had been causing a mess for a year. He added that she was taming spirits, but she was only getting cocky with the power. John said his sister's name again, Namina, and the sound felt strange in his mouth. It hit him. They were talking about that glowing orb from the summoning. Watching her keep gathering power, he felt his dislike deepen. Mishit's heart clenched. Once Namina could see spirits, she'd dominate them. Fafon groaned that the spirit's constant racket was unbearable. Val wept, voice shaking, explained the hero's actions would ripple far and wide. Jean asked, voice bright with curiosity, what kind of effect it would have. Misha told him to see for himself. She pointed toward the window, urging him to look outside. He shut his eyes for a moment, steeling himself for whatever he might see. His eyes popped open as he turned to look at the window pane. A terrifying horde of tiny glowing spirits pressed against the glass, their pale lights trembling like caught fireflies. He let out a terrified gasp, asking if they were all spirits. It was too much. It hit him. He'd been living among them unseen, and it was better that way. Michaud said they'd been drawn to his power, and he asked what he should do. Val insisted that giving them names would free them from his sister's control. How cheeky of the spirits to pick him first, before anyone could tame them. Overwhelmed, he asked if he could really name so many. Fafon suggested they just use numbers. He said he could rename them later if he wanted. Valagade added that spirits could get new names from people they liked. Jean mused on the spirit's pecking order, realizing someone they liked was stricter than him. Fafon warned him the name would call the spirits to lend him power, and Jean understood. Michaud said they should begin outside. The spirits couldn't cross the threshold. She called the spirits into a straight line so they could be named for the comfortable life he'd known. Jordan sat at the table and began the task, calling out each of their new names. He went down the list, naming each item by its color and number. An hour later, he reached yellow 52, but the line was still there. He slumped onto the table, utterly spent, groaning that he needed a break. A tiny spirit drifted down and poked his cheek insistently. He shot upright and blurted that he had to go check on Ash. He flicked on his transference skill and slipped away from his duties in a heartbeat. He reappeared in Consume, a small relieved sigh slipping from his lips. He thought he'd escaped, only to find the goddess Michoud waiting. Startled, he asked if she had been following him, but she just giggled. As he drew near the bed, the little bird spirit fluttered over to him. Misha nodded. The little bird was indeed a spirit, just as he knew. Jean's voice trembled as he explained that the person in the bed was Adelheid, known as Ash. He told me, shoot, that she had collapsed when he tried to release the spirit. The goddess looked at him, sudden fierce concern burning in her eyes. She cried out dramatically, "This is a maiden and a terrible pinch!" She hovered above this bed and, with a sweeping flourish, repeated her dramatic declaration. John's heart dropped when he realized Misha could clearly see Adelheid as a woman. Misha accused him, calling him a bad human who was about to take advantage of her. She wagged her finger playfully, teasing him that he was wrong. She laid her hands on Adelheid's forehead and breathed a soft, gentle blessing over her. She declared that, thanks to her intervention, Adelheid should be fine now. She reassured John, telling him Adelheid would be all right. He felt a sudden wash of relief. She reassured him, saying not to worry. She guessed Adelheid would awaken the next night. Misha then asked him, "What's the name of the small bird spirit?" He remembered that his appraisal skill had revealed its name, Rue. He said its old contract was broken, but a new one could be made. Misha told him the little spirit wanted him to name it. He toyed with the idea of the fluffy Chon. Its soft feathers called to him, but he shook the thought off. He leaned closer, captivated by its gorgeous blue plumage, and began to think. Searching for the perfect name, Jean looked to the small spirit and asked, "How about Az?" The bird nuzzles his cheek affectionately, showing its instant approval of the new name. He grins, saying he took the name from the Italian word for the color blue. The newly christened Az lets out a bright, happy chirp, as if asking to stay. Jean looks over at the sleeping Adelheid, a quiet ache settling in as she knows she'll miss her longtime companion. He steels himself to resume his duties, and asks Michoud if they should go back to the matter. Using his transference skill, he reappears at his estate under a story sky. He freezes, stunned to find the gods Gakli and Rudale waiting for him too. He sits at his desk and begins the long, hard work of naming the spirits. At last he finishes, only to be told the gods will return if more appear. A surge of power wells up inside him and he reaches to cast a light spell, but Adelheid warns him to wait. It's too late. A blinding, explosive flash of white light bursts from his hand. He lets out a raw cry of pain, clutching his eyes against the blinding light of his own magic. Adelheid watches, exasperated, her voice tight as she reminds him she had explicitly told him to wait. She anchored the spell in darkness, then told him it was safe to look. Michaud explains the incredible power was born from the shared gratitude of every light spirit he had named. Goddess Val's voice cuts through the noise, warning him to learn control. Such power is dangerous without proper visualization. He sheepishly remembers Misha's earlier advice about imagining the magic and feels the sting of his mistake. Suddenly, his stomach let out a loud growl that shattered the divine tension. He mutters under his breath, "It's about time for dinner." He turns and finds the entire pantheon of DAD staring at him, their eyes bright with expectation. Wearing a weary smile like a mask, he plays the gracious host and asks if they'll be staying to eat. The gods instantly shout their oddly picky food requests, from honey to plain salt. He whips up a simple but mouth-watering meal. Grilled fish nestled in hearty pork soup. He lifts a spoonful of warm soup to his lips, savors it, and quietly murmurs how delicious it is. He looks up from his bowl, staring in disbelief at the surreal sight of gods seated at his table. The goddesses Mishut and Herulfa savor their honey and wine in a soft, graceful hush. The elder gods, Gekkel and Val, seem quietly content with their humble bread and steaming tea. John can't stop thinking how strange and surreal this scene is. The young god Roardale beams as he spoons salt into his mouth, exclaiming how strangely special it tastes. Jean Asif is really okay, just eating salt, but he looks worried about the boy. That strange meal leaves him baffled. Can spirits even eat food? Let me explain. Humanoid spirits can eat, but they can't actually taste a thing. She leans in, eyes bright, and explains that they prefer to savor sensations like morning dew or the scent of flowers. As Jean takes it in, his wolfish spirit pops up, eyes pleading for a bite. He gives the fluffy creature a gentle scold, telling it to wait until he's finished his meal. Fafon looks at Rish, and in that look he lets the secret out. The tiny spirit had once been his mighty master. Jean looks down at Rish, eyes wide and stunned, completely thrown by the unexpected revelation. Michaud giggles, says the old Rish was unapproachable, but this version is undeniably cute. She forces out an apology, confessing she still can't shake a nagging suspicion about the spirit's true nature. Her sudden change in tone knocks John off balance, leaving him completely bewildered. God lays bare Rich's tragic past. He was a god of destruction who shook the very earth. Before its fall, the spirit wore arrogance like armor, crushing anyone who dared stand against its selfish desires. Jean stared at the fluffy creature in shock, blurting out that it was an alpha dog. Mishit, the goddess, stares utterly bewildered at the unfamiliar word alpha. He frames the alpha as a pack's leader, laying out how that power dynamic can become unhealthy. He adds that to live by human rules, you have to respect the proper order of things. Gali reminds him that Rish isn't a common wolf, he's a spirit. Jean asks if a fan of wolves and a fan of spirits could really be that different, but he's met with only silence. Gal fires a stern warning. Rish's is incredibly smart, stubborn, and shouldn't be underestimated. Jean just looks at Rish, musing that whatever its past was, it's very cute now. Misha tells him to be careful, and he thanks her, grateful for her constant warnings and concern. She takes his hands, calling him her precious person and admiring his roguish charm. As the gods begin to fade, Michaud breathes one last heartfelt thank you into the dimming air. She asked him to keep watching over the spirits, and he nodded his agreement just as they began to fade away. For a heartbeat, only he and the god Vavan remained, the night around them deep and utterly still. Buffon gives Risha one last pat, calls it the proud wolf, and then he too departs. Buffon dissolves into a pillar of divine light, leaving Jean alone in his manor. Jin turned God's words over in his mind, thoughtfully whispering proud wolf to himself. Rish instantly rolls onto its back, playfully baring its belly in a goofy little show. Deciding he'd had enough excitement for one night, Jean resolves to soak in a bath and drift off to sleep. The next day he finds himself walking through the bustling, clattering streets of the pottery town. He steps into the shop, every move driven by a single aim, to order a set of custom postables. While waiting, he cannot stop staring at a beautiful tea set, and suddenly decides to buy some new dishes. He arrives at Malcolm the Potter's workshop, where massive outdoor kilns loom like sleeping giants. He greets the craftsman and, with a hopeful grin, unveils his design for a new bathtub. Malcolm replies that he, too, has been turning over ideas for a new product design. Jean leans forward, listening with fierce focus, fingers curled around the scroll that holds his own detailed plans. Malcolm mentions a timely inquiry from a noble across the border in the Starling Zone. The noble wants a tub with cat's feet. Jean knows right away it's his sister's party. Malcolm's voice brimmed with eagerness as he asked for his help, and Jean agreed, figuring he might as well cooperate. Leaving the workshop, he's puzzled by how his past keeps finding new ways to reach him. He heads back to the rented house in Kassam to check on his recovering guest. Inside, Adelheid begins to stir, her brow creased in a frown as she slowly drifts back into consciousness. Jean steps into the room with Az on his finger and, his voice low, asks if she is all right. Adele hides her eyes, then they fly open in surprise as she sees him, a small gasp escaping her. She thanks him for his help, then anxiously asks if she has any painful injuries. She winces and says her back's a little sore, probably from lying in bed for so long. She wonders aloud, her voice thin, if she's been asleep since the morning or only since the night before. Jean, calm as ever, tells her it's been 3 whole days, and she stands utterly shocked. She feels bad about the trouble, but he shrugs it off, saying he only let her rest. Then he sheepishly admits he went and renamed her bird while she slept. She gently strokes the tiny creature and asks him what name he chose for it. He looks at her and, calm and certain, simply says the new name he has chosen as. A rare, beautiful smile blooms on Adelheide's face as she calls it a good name. She says the spirit's acceptance means it likes him, and John blushes in surprise. He stands frozen, stunned by her transformation, struck by how beautiful she is without her constant scale. She watches how comfortable Az seems with him and asks if that's really the case. Holding it, she muses that she's not just a beautiful woman, but a handsome youth. Sheen flushes, heart pounding, convinced this newfound charm is just a trick to lure him into bed. Adelheid stares at him, confused, and asks if she was the one he tricked. A small panic hits Jean as she realizes she's sitting up in the very bed he put her in. He waves his hands away like it's nothing and insists he never tricked her. He holds out a bowl of warm soup and a place to rest, and she softly asks if she can stay the night. She says she couldn't be so cruel as to throw her out. Then she apologizes. Jean smiles and tells her to get well soon so she can pay him back for the end. Her thoughts drift to the Infez, and she calls him a diligent person. Later that day, they end up in a lively city tavern, the place buzzing with life. Jean's eyes find Note and Dean chatting together at the bar. Note's face, etched with pure relief, turns to Adelheid and he breathes, "Ash-sama. So glad she's safe." Jean watches from afar, quietly, as Adelheid and her butler Note stand together. Adelheid watches, noting that while some people have spirits, none have flowers. Jean agrees. A cheerful voice bursts out to announce their arrival. The adventurer Dean has found them. Dean, wanting to make up for the earlier trouble, offers a drink and asks Adelheid what she thinks. Adelheid steps forward, calling herself Ash, and introduces her companion, Note, a former adventurer. Jean watches them, feeling that a pair or trio makes no difference. 2 large wooden mugs brimming with frothy ale sit on the tavern table. Dean asks Jean if he had a type, casually bringing up his sister Amil. Dean explains that a male spirit affinity has been drawing in one wild adventure after another, and asks Jean to keep it quiet. He's embarrassed to admit it, but his sister's spoiled ways really need to be put in their place. They say a spirit's mischief can slip into anyone's life, happening entirely by accident. Adelheid warns that a spirit's prank can spiral into something dire, just like Dean's possession. Dean gives a slow, accepting nod as Jean suddenly realizes she's trying to warn him. Adelheid couldn't help but wonder how strange their situation must look to anyone watching from the outside. Dean takes a long, steady drink and says he'll take care of Adelheid's payment later. He steps up and offers to find John, since he's now living with his sister. A polite note gently informs Dean that they need 2 rooms for a short stay. Jean sips the ale, relieved that at 15 he can drink without guilt, even if the taste is disappointingly dull. Dean calls out to him, his voice snapping him to attention. He blurts out, baffled, why John acts like a mid-level adventurer when he's clearly different. Dean offers to introduce him to a dependable adventurer who takes every request seriously. John accepts the offer gratefully, saying it would be a great help. Dean suggests they meet up again, same time tomorrow in Jean Grease. Hesitating, Dean's voice dropped. There was one more thing he needed to tell them. He warns Jean and Adelheid to watch out for that strange pull between them. He jabbed a finger at Adelheid, his voice sharp, telling her to stop scouring around whenever things got weird. Jean suddenly pipes up that he agrees she's scowling, and Dean is taken completely by surprise. Dean fumes that they're the strange ones as a man peeks around the corner, clearly annoyed. A new chapter begins. Joan wakes in a soft bed, Rich sleeping nearby. Jean sits up, grinning, and cheerfully greets his spirit wolf Rich with a sunny good morning. He lifts the fluffy Rich into his arms, and the creature beams with joy in return. He looks out the window, sees the mountain's peak capped in snow, and knows winter has come. In the hot pan, bacon and a sunny side-up egg hiss and sizzle, sending out an irresistible, mouth-watering scent. He pours water into a pot, preparing to cook. He spreads a thick, glossy blanket of plum jam across the piece of toast. He chomps down on a big, satisfying bite of his breakfast. He decides the pairing of sweet jam and savory cheeses is truly excellent. He sips his morning drink, quietly staring as the cold season edges closer. A raw, painful memory shoots through him. His first wretched winter, surviving on the island. His plate's now empty. He offers a heartfelt thanks for the wonderful meal. He pushes back from the table and stands, ready to prepare for his meeting in town. He arrives in the familiar, dusty, rustic streets of the frontier town Cosm. Dressed in a dark hooded cloak, he steps forward and says, "I'm Jong." Adelheid and Note arrived and introduced them as Ash and Note. Adelheid says she wants to make sure she pays for the potion properly. Jean tries to shrug it off, but she stubbornly insists on repaying him. Her expression grows intensely serious. She thinks he's being too reserved. Jean suggests they hold off and deal with it once her living situation is more stable. Adelheid accepts his terms, and Note gives a respectful bow, every movement showing understanding. At the call of his name, Jane lifts his hand in greeting. Dean waves from a nearby doorway, beckoning him to come over. Dean nodded to the rugged man at his side and introduced him as Retzi, while Jean met him with a quiet, polite greeting. Brett returns the greeting with a shy smile and admits he's not great with formalities. Jean shakes his hand, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Could this be the reliable adventure Dean mentioned? Retzi turns to Dean, his face hard as he calls Dean. He suddenly pinches James' cheeks, grumbling that his pretty face will attract all the women. Dean winks, confesses with a sheepish grin that he's not as careful as Gina seems. John's face lights up as he blames his handsome features on those people. The gods. She can call out to the startled Retz to get his attention. Retzi's expression shifts to serious. He nods. It's time for them to leave. Dean asks if Rezi is happy to just finish the quest the normal way, and Rezi confirms with a quiet, steady nod. John grins and teases, asking if Retze has a complex about his own face, and Retze quickly denies it. Now that his first official request is finally taken care of, he steps into the snowy forest. Their feet crunch through the snow as Retzi tells them their main objective. In winter, Retzi explains, he hunts rabbits for their excellent meat and fur. He adds that, sure, bear pelts sell, but their meat is tough. Nothing like a good rabbit. John points out that the reward for bears looks like it dropped recently. Let's ask Jean to check it out. Tell him it's because of him and Ash. He crouches, pressing a finger into the dirt as he shows how to read a monster's trail in the grass. Jean couldn't help being impressed. Red Sea seemed cool and totally professional. RETS explains that a rabbit's hind legs are bigger than its front paws. Jean stares at the linear tracks and knows at once they belong to a fox. Retz kneels by the trail and confirms it's from horned rabbits, and Jean asks, "How can you tell?" He points at the faint yet unmistakable claw mark etched into the snow. Retz figures out that a monstrous fox is the one hunting it. Jean is stunned by his skill. John realizes he's been leaning only on his skills, not on quietly watching and thinking things through. Retz explains his shortbow works on normal animals, but it won't touch monsters. He calmly draws the bow back, his aim steady and laser-focused. He locks onto his target and sends the arrow hurtling at the monster rabbit. The arrow hits its mark, and the rabbit stands stunned, its eyes swirling. Retz notes that monster rabbits are easy prey, coming right up out of pure curiosity. Gina Grease asked if he could also watch him hunt a fox. In the little shop, a woman beams and praises Retzi's clean, precise butchering. Jean couldn't help but be impressed by Red Sea's top-notch people skills and professional poise. A round of celebratory drinks is set down at their table in the tavern, glasses clinking as smiles spread. Jean thanks Retzi for the day's lesson, smiling as he says he learned so much. Ritzy calls John a strange man for taking pleasure in his simple, practical way of hunting. Jean Flustard says, with a confident smirk, that Red Sea's methods fit his slender arms far better. Reddy laughs, urging him to drink more. Jean replies with a sheepish thank you. That night, Jean's manor stands silent and proud beneath a starry sky, perched on a snow-covered peak. The next morning, Jean rolls up his sleeve, bracing himself to start a new routine. He collapses mid-push-up, vowing he'll start muscle training, while Rich looks on, confused. He steps into a town street lined with neat, well-built houses. He greets the potter Malcolm, who smiles and warmly welcomes him into his workshop. Malcolm proudly reveals the gleaming Finnish cat's foot bathtub, and Jean stands there, mouth open in amazement. Jean thanks him, and Malcolm wants to know how he plans to carry it home. He smiles awkwardly as the realization hits him. He'd completely forgotten about that logistical problem. He panics when he can't use his storage skill, and Malcolm suggests arranging a card. Jean blurts out that he hasn't handled it, pleading with the potter to just wrap it up. Malcolm and his assistant carry the wrap tub outside and call out, "Is this far enough?" Jean watches, breath held, as Potter Malcolm talks through the custom bathtub project. He listens to the conversation, a faint puzzled smile tugging at his lips. He hesitates, picturing the hassle of using his storage magic on something this big. Snow begins to fall, soft flakes settling on the timber-framed house he has rented in Kasum. John gets to work, hands steady as he pries up the old broken floor tiles. He digs a trench outside in the cold, determined and steady, preparing the ground for the new plumbing. He lays the new wall with careful hands, his eyes fixed on every single brick. With the main construction done, he grins, chest full of pride at his handiwork. He stands triumphant in the new bathroom, chest puffed and smiling as he admires the gleaming finished clawfoot tub. A sudden knock at his door snaps him out of his moment of satisfaction. Adelheid stands there, holding out a gift and saying she's sorry for the interruption. She says she came to bring him her housewarming greetings. Gina's eyes sparkled with happy surprise as she asked where she had found a house. She pointed to the building right next door, and his jaw dropped at the news. He laughs, realizing they're now practically next-door neighbors. Adelheid says a note found its way to the house, even though she never told him Jean's address. Jean suspects this isn't a coincidence. Deep down, he knows it's probably his fault. She confesses, voice low and trembling, that she feels a strange, floating sensation around him. Her intense blush throws him off balance as she asks if he felt her floating. He quickly shifts the subject and invites her inside, out of the cold. He reaches out, offering her a warm cup of tea. At the table, he thanks her for the gift and promises he'll enjoy it. The gift turns out to be a gorgeous, mouth-watering fig tart. He takes a bite, the fork clinking sharply against the plate. He declares it's the best dessert he's ever had in the whole town. Adelheid gives her butler credit, marveling at his excellent taste. Her brows lift in curiosity as she casually changes the subject. She arrived at his door and asked, "What are you making?" He tells her it was a bath, and she looks at him, baffled by the idea. She frowns, baffled by the strange idea of taking a bath inside her own house. Deciding it's easier to show than explain, he leads her into the room. Adelheid gasps, awe washing over her as she stares at the elegant modern bathroom. She asks, "Is this really a bath?" And he nods, quietly confirming that it is. She murmurs, "I've never seen anything so beautiful." He invites her to be the very first to try it the moment the walls dry. Adelheid asks, voice bright and hopeful, if she can bring a note to see this incredible creation. A heartbeat of silence passes as they wait for the butler to arrive. Note Pierce stood at the door, politely announcing his presence. Adelheid beams with pride as she shows off the new bathtub to her impressed butler. She beams, delighted, and reminds him she promised to be the first to use it. Jean breaks into a cold sweat the moment he remembers that Adelheid is a noble lady. Note, amused says that while a servant should refuse, he's quite interested. He then asked, voice curious, if Jean had shown them the kitchen too. Adelheid said with surprise that the house had no unpleasant smells. Notine peers at the partitioned toilet, brow furrowed, and asks, "Which workshop built this?" Jean pauses, a flicker of pride and shame crossing his face, then admits he built it himself. The butler stands frozen, completely stunned by the unexpected revelation. Adelheid beams with pride, confirming that Jean renovated the house himself. Node cries out urgently, asking whether he has registered these techniques with the guild. He presses John to act right now, insisting he'll strike it rich. The scene shifts to John in a snowy forest, a cold knot in his gut. He knows he's in trouble. He shivers violently at the edge of a frozen lake, declaring, "It's far too cold." He wants to make Adelheid a futon, but first he needs to get a downcoat. He spots horned geese and decides to hunt them quickly so he can go home. His hand glows, charged with power, as he prepares to cast a spell. He pulls back his bow, murmuring a silence spell so his attack slips through the quiet. The arrow sailed silently through the cold air towards the geese. It slams into one of the birds, which cries out as it's hit. He beams, thrilled by his successful shot. He starts reeling in his catch, but he can't shake the uneasy feeling that something's wrong. Suddenly, other birds swoop in, drawn by the smell of blood. He bolts away in a rush, using his transference skill to vanish in an instant. He lands safely back at his manor, shaken and reeling from the sudden attack. A fire crackles in his home, its warmth a quiet, welcome comfort. He settles by the hearth beside Rish, determined he'll hunt more later. A firm knock rings out on the heavy door of the stone manor. He opens it to find a note asking, "How's the move going?" Adelheid is there too, beaming as she thanks Jean for helping with her renovations. She says it like a small triumph. Members of the commercial guild came to see his work. No presses a moving-in gift into his hands. A futon so light it almost floats. The note spills the secret. It's made from the feathers of a horned white goose. Jean stares in stunned disbelief. He knows it's a priceless, top-quality item. Adelheid admits it might be a bit too luxurious for a housewarming gift. Jean grins sheepishly, admitting he never knew the geese were so valuable. Adelheid asks him to come to her house for dinner, because her kitchen still isn't usable. She tells John, "You should come along too." Note smiles politely and refuses, explaining softly, "A butler does not dine with his master." Adelheid insists. She said she invited him in Genegris. The scene snaps back to Kassim's timber-framed houses. A lavish dinner is laid out, the centerpiece a whole roasted goose with skin crackling golden. John explains, voice earnest, that he tried his best to recreate the fig tart she brought him. Note inspects the roasted goose, her eyes lighting up as she remarks on its high quality. The three of them bow their heads and whisper a quiet prayer of thanks before their meal. Adelheid sinks a big, satisfying bite into the tart. Her eyes widen in surprise as she blurts out, "It's delicious!" Note savors the soup, finding the combination of flavors exquisite. Jean watches Adelheid's stern face. but he can tell she's enjoying the meal. He can feel himself slowly starting to understand her better. He tells her she looks happy, and she agrees, saying good food is what makes her feel that way. Note moves to serve the tart, then freezes mid-step as danger prickles the air. A tiny, dark, fuzzy spirit zips out from the desert. It darts past Jean, leaving the tart smoking on the plate. Adelheide's face went hard in an instant as she felt the magic. Note's face hardens into a grim line, his eyes locked on the disturbance. Startled, she wondered what had just happened so suddenly. A memory of Chris's spirits surged up. One of them a dark, unknown entity. Adelheid suspects Jean is faking cluelessness just to test her own spirit powers. Jean's pulse spikes as he realizes he's under suspicion. He knows he has to bluff his way out. He smiles, blames it on the temperature difference, and offers to fetch a towel. He walks away, leaving a pensive Adelheid behind to watch him go. Note the elderly butler. He watches with a grave, silent concern. Jean wonders how to handle the fiery spirit, recalling that metal is its weakness. He declares this its punishment and dunks the box into a jar of pickling brine. Relieved, he exhales and sets down the special enamelware container he brought from Kassam. His spirit leapt with joy, promising to prepare his favorite things for him later. Suddenly, a note appears behind him, making him jump as it calls his name. Jean turns, a friendly smile lighting his face, and asks the butler what he needs. Notice bows, apologizing deeply. He's sorry that his spirit ruined the tart. Flustered, Jean asks if Adelheid knows that spirits exist. Gazing at the contained spirit, Jinfine stood there, utterly clueless about the matter. A small note spells out the harsh, unbending order that keeps the main noble house towering over its branch families. He can't help noticing how Jean's gray hair and amber eyes resemble Adelheid's. Gina blinks in shock, wondering if commanding spirits is even a known ability. He refuses to be pulled into their family drama, determined to keep his distance. He presses a seal onto the note that tells the spirit to use the entrance next time. A mushroom spirit suddenly pops up on Notes' head, and he mistakes it for a pickle. Jean's breath catches as the truth sinks in. He and the butler now share the same secret. The deep night sky stretched like a vast glittering sea of brilliant stars. A huge ship sits at the pier, the bustling port town alive all around it. Jean steps into Port Town's lively fish market, senses on high alert as he begins to investigate. A tiny white cat creeps forward, eyes bright, and lunges to snatch a fish from the vendor's basket. He smiles, soaking up the market's lively, chaotic energy. He spots his sister and her friends, and a sharp memory hits him. They'd misused their magic. A diagram shows magic seeping into spirits and twisting animals into monsters. He can't shake the feeling that the hero is carelessly using magic, blind to the damage it could cause. He overhears the local fishermen, voices low and bitter, complaining that rivals are muscling in on their fishing grounds. One fisherman admits their recent skirmishes have left them injured. Another fisherman scoffs, sneering that the hero and the saint are the real problem. He can't help musing that if a demon lord appears, they'll end up needing their help. A pickpocket slips a hand toward a purse and is grabbed mid-theft. The little coin pouch clatters from the thief's hand the moment he's caught. John snatches the purse and realizes the man fleeing is a pickpocket. It seems nothing about his sister's real situation has changed at all. Having seen enough, he decides to pick up some seafood and head home. Snow tucks a soft white blanket over the roof of his large, quiet manor house. He lays out a mouth-watering feast of raw and grilled oysters for dinner. He lifts a fresh oyster to his lips, eager to savor it. The fresh oysters are plump and delicious, safe to eat, thanks to appraisal. The grilled oysters are amazing, their fragrant miso aroma drifting up to tempt every bite. He decides to save the leftover oysters, soaking them in oil to pickle and preserve. Seeing Rich watching him, he smiled warmly and gently asked the spirit if it wanted to play. Rich edges toward the outstretched hand, hesitates, then leans in and gives it a tentative sniff. The spirit wolf turns its head away and lets out a disdainful puff of air. He asked, breathless and a little nervous, if Rich dislikes the smell of seafood as it backs away. As the dark creeps in, he realizes he must make his own light. He lets loose his magic, and the window erupts into a blinding white light. Blinded by the brightness, he cries out and covers his eyes with his hands. He steels himself to tame his magic and plans a special training for tomorrow. Deep in a snowy forest where monsters lurk, his special training begins. A low growl snaps him to attention. A horned rabbit is nearby. He unleashes his power, casting a powerful swirling fireball spell. A blazing fireball engulfs the horned rabbit, hurling it through the air. The defeated monster lies dazed on the ground, its eyes swirling like whirlpools. Feeling how immense his power is, he knows he must learn to control it. He practices his control by engulfing a large wolf in another fireball. He casts a wind slash, its invisible blade slicing clean through another monster rabbit. He summons bullets of water, pelting the horned fox with shimmering magical projectiles. After a long night of practice, he can feel he's become so much better. He stares at the pile of defeated monsters, a cold doubt creeping in. Did he overdo it? He decides to tap into his storage skill and conjure a light source. The Adventure Guild's large timber-framed building stands tall, its wooden beams bold against the sky. He strides into the guild, determined to check the seasonal quest requests. He steels himself and decides he must go back to investigate the forest's deepest, darkest part. And an adventurer reports the deep forest felt strangely stirred up. Dean frets about hunting a threehorn without an official, high-paying quest. He clenches his fist, making the threehorn's immense strength and danger impossible to ignore. Chris bursts in, declaring they can't wait for the creature to grow stronger. Jean's stare stood there blankly, completely bewildered by the flamboyant stranger's appearance. Jean reaches for the name Chris, feeling it tug at the edge of his memory. Adelheid and Node burst in, lugging a huge bear pelt from their hunt. Chris swept in with a dramatic flourish, grinning as he called Adelheid the bear hunter. Chris sees Adelheid's sour mood but pushes on, insisting the mission is far more important. John recalls Dean suggested, with quiet confidence, that Chris would be a great partner for him. Chris leans in close to Jean, voice low and amused. "You're a troublesome but interesting man." He smiles warmly, asking who this beautiful person is and teasingly likening him to a Dark Lord. Adelheid gives a dry, wry nod and admits that Genus really does like the Dark Lord. Chris says, "I'm Chris Leese, a 3-star silver rank adventurer." As their hands meet, Jean notices Chris's hair and eyes shifting color. Chris flashes a knowing, confident smile as he sizes up the young man before him. He extends a formal invitation to Jane, asking her to join him on the threehorn hunt. Gina's breath caught as shock hit her. He had been roped into this dangerous quest. Chris bowed politely and, in a steady voice, asked the Dark Lord to join him on the hunt. John stands stunned as the truth hits him. He's been pulled into the situation. Dean struggles to hold back laughter, but Chris says with a grin that he'll remember it. Chris admits he didn't see the beast, but worry still gnaws at him. He puffs out his chest and proudly declares that his powerful intuition is at work. Dean is utterly dumbfounded that Chris is basing this on nothing but a gut feeling. Chris insists it's more than intuition, and Dean can feel his frustration mounting with every word. Chris asked, "Should we hurry or wait until spring for the hunt?" Note whispers to Jean, puzzled. Why does this flashy man hold so much sway? The note reveals that Master Chris is followed and aided by a spirit. The spirit is a revelation type, gifting him flashes of the future and a glowing reputation. John knows that anyone who can see spirits is believed to be under the god's protection. This blessing gifts you stronger muscles, sharper reflexes, and skin that resists sunburn. Dean's stomach drops as he realizes a subjugation will take 2 silver-rank adventurers, himself included. Chris slyly fixes Dean with a steady stare and reminds him he still owes the guild a debt. The guild is gearing up to recruit 2 iron-rank adventurers for the three-horn hunt. Dean's heart sank as he realized they'd have to summon gold-rank adventurers from other cities. Chris's expression went grave as he realized the forest's air just wasn't right. Adelheid's face darkens into a grimace as she realizes the foul presence is miasma. A heavy, tense hush settles between Adelheid, John, and Dean, the air thick with unspoken questions. Dean's voice trembles with hope as he asks John to join their quest into the forest come springtime. John cuts him off on the spot, a quick pass and a raised hand stopping him cold. Dean blurts that Jean can just be the baggage handler and run from danger. Jean admits he can't help but be curious about how the forest spirits are doing. He says yes to the quest, and Dean's face lights up with astonished delight. Janensis Adelheids should come too. After all, 2 spirits hearing is better. Dean agrees, quiet but determined. They'll make the request through the guild and wait for spring. A victorious hush settled over Jean's manor. The roof and grounds lay blanketed in thick snow. By the fire, Jean can't shake the idea that his sister's magic is making strange things happen in the forest. He vows to head back into the forest tomorrow, seething that he has to clean up her mess. A caption announces his destination, the darkest, deepest part of the demon forest. He steps into the snowy woods, determined to check on the spirit's condition. He activates his ability and sees the air filled with countless faint, ghostly beings. Once a week, a tiny winged fairy flutters through the shimmering air. Its form is unstable, flickering and unsure. A ghostly fox spirit wavers in the air, its essence ragged and worn. A small, dark, blob-like spirit quivers, barely holding its shape and threatening to dissipate completely. He can't help but notice that most spirits who come to his home arrive ragged and worn like this. Suddenly, the larger, bat-winged spirit lets out a desperate cry and lunges at the smaller, weaker one. The dark spirit bites down, draws the other into itself, and it vanishes in a puff. The dark spirit's shadowy shape seems to gather and harden, coming together into something almost solid. He realizes they consume each other to replace their lost essence, a sight he can't bear. His healing won't work. He must make contracts and give them names, just like with Rish. He reaches out with sudden resolve and firmly grabs one of the dark, blob-like spirits. He looks at the small creature and gives it a new name. "You are Black One." He cradles another small spirit against his chest and names it Black 2. He cradles a dark, ghostly rabbit against his chest and murmurs, Black 3. He holds a shadowy squirrel in his hands and declares it Black 4. He lets out a weary sigh and decides that's enough work for one day. He finds it especially exhausting to call out the names of the spirits that resist his control. He steps out of the deep forest into the bright afternoon sun pouring through the trees. He trudges through the snow, drawing closer to his friend's familiar stone farmhouse. A voice at the doorway cuts through the hush, asking if he has a moment to spare. The Dionisio family meets him with warm smiles and open arms, the children bursting into joyful shouts of his name. The father pulls him into a tight hug, a gesture John still isn't used to. He lays out a handful of souvenirs as gifts, grinning as he says he brought a cake, too. The two young boys look up at him, eyes sparkling and grateful smiles brightening their faces. The children swarm him in a tight group hug, thanking him for being there. The father beams as he accepts the gifts and says, Gina's always so thoughtful. The mother Shibos beams at him, thanks him, and says she'll cut the cake for everyone. The father, already teary-eyed from the sake, wonders what Jean has been up to. Shivas explains how they pass the winter by the fire, shelling beans and repairing farm tools. Jean offers to help, and the father accepts his assistance with a grateful nod. Shiva comes back with a bright smile and cheerfully says the cake's been cut. The boys munch on this cake with wide grins, all exclaiming how delicious it is. Tina, the daughter, flushes and, with a sudden burst of courage, boldly announces she'll be Jean's bride. Her mother watches, amused, while her father erupts, vehemently declaring he will not allow it. The father protests desperately, insisting Tina promise she'd be his bride when she grew up. He snaps, demanding to know what John dislikes about his daughter, leaving John utterly confused. Grinning, the two boys cheerfully announce that they'll go be John's brides instead. They lunged at the bewildered Jen, trapping him in another tight hug. A dark, determined expression crosses the father's face. He throws himself into the hug, shouting, I'm coming too! Tina and her mother watch the chaotic scene, laughing together in pure joy. John thinks about the cozy warmth of a normal family, one that feels so different from his own. Winter slips away in a blink, and with spring's first breath, it's time to set out. A flamboyant voice rings out, announcing the arrival of the wise man, Chris. Chris greets Adelheid, calls her by his new nickname, and she looks anything but thrilled. Retzi, the grizzled adventurer, steps forward, clears his throat, and gives the party a short, formal introduction. Retz warns Jean to be careful. Chris is the one in charge of their battle plans. Dean admits he's worried about taking the inexperienced Jean along on the hunt. Adelheiden and Chris both seem to feel the same way about this. Dean asks, voice tight with curiosity, if the famous new bear hunter might be Adelheid. Jean suddenly realizes he hasn't been to the guild lately to record his accomplishments. Chris laughs, a grin spreading as the pieces click into place and he understands. Jean couldn't shake the thought that Chris had insisted he come because the spirit favored him. Chris confirms his own spirit has been whispering to him about Jean for a while. A tiny winged fairy perches on Chris's shoulder, its bright eyes fixed on his handsome face, admiring him. A young woman named Kana introduces herself to the group with a formal greeting. Kana bowed with a soft smile, thanked Jean for his past help, and gently told him not to worry. She bites her lip and asks softly if he could share the specifications of his pack when they return. She presses an ornate bottle into his hands, a guild gift meant to keep him safe. The party leaves the town and steps into the deep, shadowed forest. Dean eyes James's impressive leather pack and, curiosity sparking, asks about the roll on top. Jean explains, smiling with pride, that it's a futon he made himself, and his companion stares in surprised disbelief. Adelheid and Dean eye it with doubt, worried it'll be too heavy and clumsy to be any use. Jean proudly demonstrates the quick-release buckle on his chest strap, snapping it open to show how effortlessly it comes off. Chris sighs, thinking his own party's luggage is probably the bigger nuisance. Even his own companion swoons at that serious look, and Jean thinks it's utterly ridiculous. The party moved in a tight formation, each step carrying them deeper into the woods. Chris moves with lithe, athletic grace, every sense razor-sharp and on high alert. Reti edges forward to scout, a small fox keeping pace with him on the tree branch. Red Sea gives the signal. It's time to make camp for the day. Thanks to the clear weather, they've made great time and set up camp by a stream. Jean heaves a heavy cast-iron Dutch oven out of his seemingly bottomless pack. He sparks a fire and, with steady hands, begins cooking a warm stew of dried chicken and vegetables. The stew bursts into a rolling boil, a steamy shout that the meal is ready. He then fishes a cloth rat bundle from his bag, preparing another surprise. He lifts the lid to reveal a box packed with perfectly cooked pork, neat cutlet sandwiches, and crispy fried chicken. Dean chews thoughtfully and remarks on how delicious Jean's lunch looks. In an instant, everyone's hands dove into the box of sandwiches. Chris takes a bite, his eyes lighting up as the bread's incredible softness gives way under his teeth. Red C and Dean say in unison, "The meat is delicious, though they'd prefer harder bread." Peering at the cutlet, ask aloud if that crunchy coating is what's known as breadcrumbs. Jean walks them through the process, admitting the oyster sauce is the toughest part to get right. Adelheid bites into the fried chicken and instantly knows it's chicken. Jean leans in and lays out the marinade. Salt, pepper, garlic, ginger, fish sauce, and brandy. Full from the satisfying meal, the party gets ready to march on. The adventurers' boots kept a steady beat as they walked the grassy forest path. Jean peers down to find his boots crusted in thick mud, far dirtier than the others. Jean can't help admiring the butler, noting his perfectly polished shoes that stay spotless even on the trail. Chris warns that wolves are numerous up ahead, and Jean, heart pounding, resolves to mimic his graceful movements. Chris smiles and says that, though weaker than bears, wolves hunt in dangerous packs. Jean and Adelheid nodded at the warning, bracing themselves as the threat closed in. Jean admits that, even though Chris can be annoying sometimes, he's also surprisingly attentive and genuinely caring. Suddenly, a pack of snarling wolves rushes out of the trees, their arrival announced by deep, low growls. "Redson!" Chris spun around without a second's thought, drawing their weapons to confront the approaching wolf pack. Jean froze in disbelief as the wolves ignored everyone else and lunged straight at him. Retz shouts his name in alarm, while Jean just winks and says they must think he's the weakest. John plants his foot firmly on the grass, bracing himself for the attack. He springs forward, hoisting his massive decapitation sword high to unleash a devastating downward swing. Jean's eyes blaze with fierce concentration as he braces to unleash the full power of his blade. In one smooth, flowing motion, Jean's sword flashed through the air, cutting down the whole wolf pack in an instant. Retzi stands frozen, his mouth wide open, completely stunned by June's incredible show of strength. Chris's eyes sparkle with delight as he dramatically dubs Jean Yu of the dark arts. Gushing, Chris is thrilled that June looks vulnerable but really isn't. John quietly disagrees inside. Dean swallowed his pride and admitted he'd been wrong, while Retzi's confidence trembled in the face of the newcomer's power. Note wisely warns them to move on at once, before the scent of blood draws in more dangerous creatures. Dean agrees without hesitation, urging the party to leave the area at once. The group walks away from the scene of the swift battle, pressing deeper into the forest. A title page for Chapter 12 appears, a quiet note that comfort was chosen over rebellion. At their new campsite, Jean gets to work setting up the simple, practical A-frame 10. He kneels before what he's built, deciding this humble little shelter will be good enough. Red Sea gives a skeptical look and asks, "Jean, are you being careless with your setup?" Chris thinks it over and suddenly realizes a waterproof sheet can make a simple roof and walls. He flings his arms wide, praising John's wonderful creation, and steps in for a hug. Jean's mind snaps back to the 2 months he spent surviving alone on a deserted island. Adelheid steps in, gently laying out a bed of soft moss to make a cozy cushion. Chris can't help but think that, with everyone spreading out their bedding, it almost feels like a Japanese mountain camp. Jean announces that he and the others will head out to catch some fish for their dinner. He decides to prepare soup for everyone, an idea he welcomes gratefully against the bone-deep cold of the night. A large pot of stew, brimming with meat and vegetables, bubbles heartily over the campfire. Jean stirs the pot called out, promising tomato soup with dried meat and plenty of vegetables. Dean scratches his head, puzzled, like he's just forgotten something important. He remembers Jean slapping dough earlier, and can't shake the thought that it might have been some kind of strange ritual. Dean is still baffled every time he remembers June's odd, ritual-like gestures. The finished ball of dough perches on the rock, perfectly smooth and ready to be used. Jean tucks the dough away to rest, already planning to use it for tomorrow's breakfast too. Through a break in the dark forest canopy, the vast starry night sky stretches out above. The campfire meal is ready. A big pot of steaming soup, smoky grilled fish, and a mysterious pizza. Chris asks about the unfamiliar dish, and Jean explains it's a pizza with bacon and asparagus. Chris stares, puzzled, and admits he's never even heard of a food called pizza before. Still bewildered, Dean turned to John and asked him to explain that strange dough-slapping ritual from earlier. A hand lifts a slice of pizza, and the melted cheese stretches into a long, gooey string. Dean takes a big bite, his eyes going wide as he blurts out how unbelievably delicious it is. Note raves about the seasoning, and Jean says it'd be great with tomato sauce too. The butler looks up, surprised, and asks Jean if he happens to have any tomato sauce. A sudden, sinking jolt hits Jean. He realizes he hasn't seen a single fresh tomato anywhere in this world. Adelheid beams, complimenting the tasty soup as Jean explains he just used some dried tomatoes. With a gentle, graceful motion, Chris plucked a stray leaf from Jean's collar. He sighs that John would have made a lovely bride, drawing a loud, annoyed protest from John. Dean grins and asks Jean what his type is, puffing out his chest in a playful little show as an example. Jean thinks Adelheid is a bit flat-chested, and she turns bright red with embarrassment. The butler note looks completely drained and visibly shaken after that chaotic dinner conversation. Retsu asks if Jean distrusts people, and Jean admits quietly that he's still learning how to interact. He remembers the time he was surrounded by untrustworthy people and became the target of their pranks. In Thought Bubbles, Red Sea and Chris Wonder talk about the true nature of these pranks. Dean says being teased after a confession must have been really embarrassing for him. Jean says it clearly. It happened 3 separate times, with girls of different ages. Dean stood stunned, exclaiming that being cursed 3 times was unbelievable. Retz gently suggests that June's unique experiences have simply made him more self-aware. Jean, he knows the truth. His manipulative older sister was the true cause of all his problems. It hit him. His sister had been behind all 3 incidents, using her friends to carry them out. She treated him like a possession and loved teasing him, so he taught himself to pretend he didn't care. Jean's shoulder watches Chris Patz brighten up and thanks him. Adelheid stays silent, eyes fixed on Jean with a deep, unreadable, serious expression. The camera glides up through the dark trees, emerging into the starry night sky above the forest. Jean sits alone by the crackling campfire, savoring each sip from a warm mug. He stared into the dark, thinking how the nights have grown so chilly, even in spring. A tiny bird spirit flutters down and perches on his shoulder, and he greets it. A voice from off-panel calls out that it's time to change the guard for the night watch. Adelheid steps toward the campfire, ready to relieve John of his watch. She holds out a Florentine cookie as a little snack, thanking him warmly for his many kindnesses. She shows off the new coat he gave her, smiling as she says how light and comfortable it feels. She confessed shyly that she'd made the coat herself to repay him for the potion he'd given her. His quiet expression makes her worry he didn't like the cookie she offered him. She leans close and whispers, "You're a good man. You deserve to be happy." Startled, Jean thanks her and shrugs his old troubles away as nothing but coincidence. He looks at her and realizes she's trying to give him real comfort and encouragement. He says his distrust is easing because he's met good people, and she asks, "Is that true?" Adelheid holds his gaze, her eyes steady and warm, and says she would be happy to be counted among those good people. A bit flustered and blushing, Jung quickly says, "Of course I'm one of them." He stands ready to go and tells her he'll leave the rest of the watch in her hands. Adelheid nibbles her cookie, a faint blush warming her cheeks as she thinks Jean's blunt honesty is both embarrassing and strangely refreshing. She blushes, stunned to find he's the complete opposite of her manipulative, two-faced sister. Jean smiles to himself, thinking they'd all better get a good night's rest for tomorrow. Elsewhere, Retzi and Dean barely touch the roasted game, both craving a stiff shot of strong liquor to wash it down. Retz nods with a grin, agreeing that the food they're eating is far better than what he gets in town. Several days later, the party huddles around the campfire, faces lit by flame and hope running thin. They still haven't tracked down their main quarry. Adelheid closes her eyes and names the special spiced wine, Redovini. The note nods to her assessment, calling out ripe berries, pepper and spice. Jean looks on, eyes wide. He's never heard of a wine called that before. Chris holds up a steaming, freshly baked roll, eyes wide, amazed that bread can be cooked in a pot. A bowl of warm bread nestles beside a dish of liver paste, a simple camp meal. Jean pauses, feeling how crucial iron and vitamins are when a long journey stretches on. Chris points at Jean's odd cone-shaped tent and asks if he plans to sleep in it. Jean makes it clear. It's not for sleeping, it's a makeshift steam bath he built. He explains to a curious Chris how he used branches to build the dome's frame. Inside the tent, a small fire breathes warmth into a carefully arranged pile of smooth river stones. John demonstrates this process, ladling water onto the hot stones. They hiss and burst into steam. Jean pours water over the hot stones, and Chris watches in amazement, eyes wide. He can almost feel how refreshing a jump into the river would be right now. Chris calls out to him, and Jean snaps around to face the adventurer. With a flourish, Chris prays Jan stood out as a remarkable comfort in the wild. Jean offers to let him use the sauna, and Chris accepts with a grateful smile. The rest of the party has also gathered, ready to join the surprise. He flicks a hand toward the sauna and asks if everyone else wants to use it too. The others in the party light up and eagerly agree to a relaxing bath. Later, Jane hangs a sheet to dry, thinking about the fun things they'd put off. He walks away from the river, and a dark, viscous drop splats onto the ground. He finds himself standing in a clearing, ringed by small, shadowy spirits. He knows he must say their names, but a cold fear knots his gut at the thought of being found out. The morning sky peeks through the dense forest canopy overhead. The next day, the party presses on, trekking ever deeper into the woods. Dean feels great after the bath, and Chris can't help noticing their quickness and steady pace. In an instant, Dean's cheerful smile hardens into a razor-sharp, focused look. He cries out for the others to wait as he darts ahead of Jean. A massive three-horned lizard, an udakeg, loomed before them, blocking their path. Dean is stunned. He'd expected to find mostly two hornets in this area. Retzi leans in, voice barely a whisper, telling Joan to hold his position and wait for the signal. He says their only chance to strike is the split second it lifts its head. Dean tells Chris they'll split up, and Chris just agrees, quiet, calm, and unbothered. With a firm step, Dean steels himself and prepares to charge the powerful monster. Adelheid stands ready as the giant lizard lumbers through the forest. Dean grits clenched his teeth, his face a mask of pure determination. He launches himself into the creature, knocking it off balance. The beast stumbles and Dean shouts, "Chris, now, make your move!" Chris springs forward in an instant, his sword already arcing downward. His blade strikes true, plunging deep into the monster's throat. Chris stands over the fallen beast, his face cool and unshaken, victorious. Adelheid praises their magnificent teamwork. No degrees, it was impressive. Retz reassures John, noting he knows he's a cautious person. John thinks to himself that he never would have pulled that off on his own. Retzi says, without a doubt, it was the three-horned one that escaped from the cage. The other adventurer reels in shock. Usually only one horn stands above the rest. John stood stunned, breath caught, staring as he tried to grasp just how immense this forest truly was. Dean let out a sigh of relief, stating their objective is now complete. Letzi suggests they make camp for the night, and Dean agrees. Chris turns to Jean, his voice urgent, as he asks him to help butcher their prize. By the river, John and Retzi begin the grim work of taking the carcass apart. Retz watches, admiration written on his face, openly praising Jones's butchering skills. John Demure insists his self-taught style is simply the product of hunting practice. He glances aside, his mind snagging on the other strange thing he noticed. He sees that another, larger group of dark spirits has gathered nearby. He can't help but wonder if the bigger spirits eventually turn into monsters, sprouting more and more horns. Jean asked Rhett, voice tight with worry, how much lord they had left for cooking. Retzi says they've got plenty, so Jean decides to go gather some asparagus. Red warns him not to wander too far from the safety of the fire. Jean comes across a few late winter mushrooms and garlic mustard plants. He makes up his mind to use his exploration skill one last time. His eye flares with raw power as he activates the skill, sweeping the area with a cold, searching gaze. Startled, he sensed a fox nearby. It was closing in fast. He realizes it's a two-horn, and it's heading straight for them. He knows he has to warn Redzi about the incoming monster right this instant. He bolts back to camp, shouting that a fox monster is nearby. Redzi says he covered them with cedar leaves, trying to hide their scent. He presses a small jar of ointment into Gianna's hand to hide their smell. Fox blurs into view, streaking toward Joan with breathtaking speed. Redzi blinks in surprise, but she figures this will be an easier fight than the Udokagi. The fox's paws pound the earth as it races forward, closing the gap fast. A dripping drill hangs from the creature's maw as it tenses, ready to strike. Retzi screams, "Jones!" and flings out a frantic warning as the fox looms over him. Jean draws his sword, bracing himself to face the massive beast alone. As the fox leaps, Retzi screams Jones's name in a piercing cry of alarm. Jean steels himself for the attack, his face a grim mask of determination. The fox suddenly crumples in front of him, a soft whimper slipping from its throat. Betsy stands frozen, eyes wide, utterly confused as events take a bizarre turn. Dean gapes in amazement, asking if Jean really took down the two-horn by himself. Chris moves closer, drama thick in his voice as he addresses Jean with a respectful title. He grabs June's hands, eyes shining, and exclaims, "You're a rising star!" Node and Adelheid simply breathe a relieved sigh that he's unharmed. Dean watched the fox twitching, breath caught, and still in awe of Jean's power. He admits, sheepishly, he thought they were only supposed to be hunting lizards. He explains that lizards barely wander from their rocks, but foxes are a whole different story. Chris notices a two-horn and knows a three-horn is likely nearby. Jean listens, a chill running through him as he realizes the fox's presence spells danger. Dean decides they shouldn't linger. We'll head back in the morning. That night, meatballs sizzle in a big pot over the campfire. Dean teases Jean, asks if he enjoyed the fried chicken that much. The party savors a hearty pasta dinner, sharing surprised smiles as they marvel at its one-of-a-kind flavor. The next day, the sun beamed down as they set off on their journey home. The group walks back through the forest, the rest of the trip calm and trouble-free. Chris and Dean walk side by side, eyes sharp and ready for anything. At last, they return to the town's stone gates. A woman from the guild greets them with a warm smile, thanking them for their work. John swallowed a groan, dread curling through him at the thought of the debriefing with the guild higher-ups. He hurriedly asked Adelheid for a note so he could have his reward collected for him. He tells them to go home and have a steaming bath waiting for him. Dean's face crumpled in confusion as he blurted, "Jean, are you leaving us already?" He finally gives in, but insists John tell him everything about the spirits later. Jean returns to the quiet street where his rented house waits. He lets out a tired sigh and lays another log into the fireplace. Little fire spirits inside a salamander giggle and dance happily in the hearth. He asks a fairy-like spirit to ferry messages between his homes. He taps his storage skill, and the bathtub instantly fills with steaming hot water. He commands the spirits to keep the bath warm for his friends. He sets his transference for skill in motion and prepares to leave for his manor. He steps into his true home and cries out for his companion, Rish. The little spirit wolf springs into his waiting arms, every bound brimming with pure joy. He pets the happy wolf, grinning as he suggests a quick bath before they go play. Adelheid sinks into the warm bath and lets out a soft, relieved sigh. John sits by the fire, staring into the flames, haunted by the thought that he needed to wash 3 times to get clean. A tiny winged spirit flits into the room, and John thanks it warmly for coming. He tells the spirit to wait as he channels his transference skill and teleports. He steps back into the bathroom, determined to drain the now lukewarm water. With a splash, fresh steaming hot water rushes in and refills the elegant claw-footed tub. Jean slips a note to Adelheid, saying hello, sorry about the wait, and warmly inviting them inside. Note presses a heavy pouch of money into his hands, and Jean takes it with a grateful smile and a quiet thank you. He tells them the bath is ready, and his note brims with gratitude for the preparations. Note, holding a wooden bucket, tells Adelheid that everything is now ready for her. Jean brings over a drink and some cheese toast, and he takes them with a soft, grateful thank you. He asked, wondering where he could possibly have found a bathtub this fine. A note explains it's a rare import. You'd be stuck waiting 6 months to get it. Jean frets that the fine pottery might make them think he's highborn. A note asks to buy the robe for Jin Lin Adelheim, but Jin says it was a gift. The butler's face goes solemn as he steels himself to reveal what he's found. He declares, voice steady, that both he and Adelheid will be joining the subjugation party. Jean's dread of another forest trip tightens in his chest, while Note insists he can't accept the robe for free. Jean raises his hands, flustered, desperately trying to refuse the pouch of money. Note's intense gaze wouldn't budge, forcing a nervous John to take the payment. Adelheid emerges from her bath, her long damp hair begging to be noticed. Jean tells her to sit and have some tea while he gets the next bath ready, but she insists on helping. He smiles warmly and urges her to rest. An attendant can't let their master do that kind of work. Note mumbles a quick excuse and slips away, carrying a basket of used towels and other items. Jean sets a tray of drinks down before Adelheid and says, "Take your time." It hits him. This is the first time he's ever seen her with her hair down. A strange tension prickles through Adelheid as her bird spirit rests atop her head. Her mood suddenly clouds over, and her face slips into that familiar brooding scowl. Jean notices the assassin look returning to her face and asks, "What's wrong?" She asked if he saw the spirits in the forest, and he met her gaze, voice low, confirming that he did. She says she hasn't seen spirits like that since a court mage went berserk. She remembers a vision of Jin walking through the dark, corrupted spirits he had found. Jean asks, curiosity lighting his voice, "What is it usually like when people use magic? He's rarely seen it." She explains that spirits willingly lend a sliver of their power through contracts. John's breath catches as he realizes the melted, shadowy spirits he saw were being destroyed by forced magic. She confirms their dark shapes are proof of the resentment inside them, a poison that eats away at everyone nearby. He asked if magic users themselves eventually become monsters, and she answered simply, "Yes, they do." Jean wears a grim smile as he thinks his sister is becoming a demon lord, not a hero. Adelheid clarifies, using magic the right way actually makes the spirits stronger and steadier. She says the spirits will gladly lend their power, as long as they aren't forced. A sad look crosses her face as she says she's lucky someone was never corrupted and is still with her. She can't help but compare her own spirit to those tormented souls they witnessed. She turned to John, voice shaking, and asked if the spirits he saw had been corrupted by people. Shayna shoots up and snaps, "Wait a moment," leaving her confused. He returns, a warm smile lighting his face as he announces that he's returned. He set the tray down and, voice low, begged her to keep it a secret from the butler. The platter cradles a tempting array of cakes and pastries, all waiting for her to savor. Adelheid stares at the unfamiliar desserts, eyes wide and filled with pure wonder. He admits he isn't sure she'll like them, but he couldn't help wanting her to try. He tells her she mustn't forget the spirits, but letting herself sink into depression won't do her any good. Adelheid is moved by his kindness and accepts the offering with a grateful smile. She bites into the cream puff and her face suddenly glows with surprised delight. John holds out a cup of tea, smiling warmly as he asks if she's enjoying the sweet tea he brought. She lifts her fork and takes a slow, thoughtful bite of the strawberry shortcake. Her eyes widen as the delicious taste hits, a look of pure bliss on her face. She says she's had apple tart before, but this one is on a whole other level. She jabbed a finger at a strawberry and asked him, eyes wide with wonder, what the small red fruit is. He thinks back to how nervous he felt serving unfamiliar dishes to a noble lady. He smiles, thinking that even though he's not good at comforting people, sweets seem to do the trick. Adelheid nodded, agreeing she liked it, a happy, content smile lighting her face. She takes a calm, steady sip of tea, the sadness that hovered over her earlier melting away. She's all sighs and contentment, quietly admitting she never realized she was such a simple person. Jean tells her that her spirit seems so much happier now too. Adelheid gazes at the tiny bird with a gentle smile and asks if it's true. Jean watches the two of them, his heart warm as he quietly shares their small happy moment. Outside the building, Note can't help but notice his lady seems to be feeling much better. A massive timber-framed building fills the scene, the place they're staying. Jean, cloaked for travel, finds himself stopped by the veteran adventurer Retsum. Retz met John's gaze and asked if he could make him a bag, even offering to pay for it. Jean can't help noticing that Dean and Chris have asked him for bags too. Retzi warns him, voice low and sharp, anything too flashy he carries will probably get stolen. While they're measuring him, Retzi makes it clear, the upcoming quest isn't optional. Every silver-ranked adventurer must take it. Jean can't help but wonder why they can't just earn stars by taking on ordinary subjugation quests. Red Sea explains that stars are like contributions, small tokens of praise, and even those with bad reputations can earn them. That means they have no clue what sort of shady characters might turn up for the quest. A notice slams the adventurer ranks onto the board. Jean and Adelheid at copper, Chris shining at silver. Jean learns that, thanks to Chris's recommendation, Adelheid can join, and it sinks in that he himself won't be going. Retz playfully grabs Jean and teases, if you're so smug, when does the quest start? Jean says it's about a month away, depending on when Amadea shows up in town. Reddy confirms, her voice steady. Amadeo is a gold-rank adventurer, summoned by the guild for the quest. John's curiosity sparked when he heard Amadeo was a powerful mage. He couldn't wait to see him in action. Reddy says the guild believes Amadeo can take on any powerful monsters that might show up. A new question tugged at him, his curiosity piqued by the news about the powerful mage. Retzi leans in, voice low, and reveals that Amadeo can see spirits too. That night, Jean slips alone into the spirit-filled forest, a dark place crawling with monsters. He's determined to hunt lizards and gather their hides to make bags for everyone. A small, dark, shadowy spirit floats out of the dark undergrowth and glides straight toward him. With practice, Jean plugs the corrupted spirit right out of the air. He cradles the small creature and calmly names it Black 95. He frees the now stable spirit and vows he'll catch them so Adelheid can have peace of mind. He gazes at the glowing forest, bracing himself. He knows he's about to be very busy again. Jean walks through the town streets as the new chapter's title appears. He finds Adelheid and Note and, with a rueful smile, apologizes for keeping them waiting. He hands over the freshly crafted bags and says, I've finished your request. All anyone noticed was the payment, but Jean shrugged and casually told him he could pay later. He thinks his knack made the bags a breeze, but he asks if it's too early to go shopping. Adelheid confirms the quest is still a ways off, but more and more outsiders are turning up. Sean's stomach drops. Retzi was right. The town's crawling with ill-mannered adventurers. A huge timber-frame building rises against a clear sky dotted with tiny specks. Two thugs block their path, leering at Jean's pretty face and demanding his money. Retzi snaps at Jane, asking why he's being targeted, and then bluntly tells him to just deal with it. Without warning, an invisible force slams into Retzi, sending him tumbling backward as he cries out in shock. Chris looks back over his shoulder and asks if Jean is all right, and she just nods. The flamboyant Chris discs bristled, annoyed the others had snuck in without an invitation. Jean loomed over the beaten man, struck by how brave he'd been, as the man muttered, breathless and half-lost, something about a black bear. The butler's notes suggest they all head to the nearby restaurant to celebrate their reunion. Several hands lifted their wooden cups high, joining together in a hearty toast. John turns to his companions, eyes full of curiosity, and asks what they've been doing since they last met. Retz explained he'd been helping Chris gather herbs and had to slip away for a little while. He admits he can't judge. He left early himself. Jean then asks about Dean. Adelheid, surprised, asks, Are you looking for a new place and moving out? Dean explains, voice low, that since he left home he's had his mother help with his sister Emile's chores. Jean listens, breath caught, realizing the guild is training Dean to keep him away from his sister. Adelheid, as Ash, coolly says her purpose is bear hunting, and Jean finds her unshakable. Holding his cup, June freezes as a sudden sharp realization snaps into place about something he's been hearing. He tells Dean he feels like he's being called Black Bear, and Dean answers that it's true. Adelheid says Ash and Bear make a powerful pair, and she notes the ad's Jean is often with her. Jean thought, quietly to himself, that he'd have much preferred the nickname Wolf. Chris swoons dramatically, agreeing that Bear doesn't suit Jean's elegant, iris-like beauty. Red Sea lifts his cup and takes a long drink, then speaks up with his own thoughts on the matter. He proudly proclaims that the name Wolf belongs to the feared Wolf King Valmoa. John repeats the name Valmoa, and Chris confirms it. He was a legendary adventurer. A ghostly image of the cloaked Valmoa flickers into view, as Dean explains he was the legend's disciple. Dean's face went red as he admitted it. His simple admiration for Valmoa was the very reason he became an adventurer. Jean smiles, steering the conversation away as he holds up a book. He presses a tailor-made scabbard into each friend's hands, smiling as he thanks them for their help. Dean accepts his gift, eyes wide with curiosity as he peers into the new scabbard. He cries out, "It's leather inside. Does that really make it worth the price?" They offered a no-doffers payment, but Adelheid dismisses it. She cares only about their safe return. With a grand flourish, she promises a feast with a whole roasted cow, and we stand there frozen, stunned by the offer. The others in the tavern crowd around, excitement in their voices as they eagerly ask to join the post-mission celebration. Jean raises his cup once more and, with a hopeful smile, wishes everyone a safe return from the quest ahead. The scene slides into the tavern at night, smoke curling from its chimney and drifting straight into the story sky. Jean's group edges toward the door while Chris and Retzi linger, opting for one more drink. John freezes in surprise when he sees Retzi heading the same way, and Retzi explains he rents a cheap room nearby. Retz fumes about some big shot ripping out the toilets for renovations and hiking his rent. Jean turns away in shame, his face burning as it finally hits him. He's the big shot, while Note and Adelheid stare. Note muses that the new toilets only make the old smells unbearable, and Jean wonders if it's some kind of missionary work. The sun climbs over the far-off mountains, spilling golden light and announcing the start of a brand new day. As is his way, Jean wakes with a lazy yawn, watching Rish sleep peacefully in the nearby basket. He savors a quiet breakfast, then decides he'll slip back into the deep forest today. A shimmer of energy wraps Jin as he calls on his transference skill, and he vanishes into the woods. He finds a swarm of flickering black spirits, trembling and waiting, ready to begin his daily work of saving them. He begins the long, slow work of giving them names, whispering black again and again. He breathes a relieved sigh, feeling he's made good progress. A single spirit floats near his hand. He knows the subjugation force will arrive any moment, and he can't wait to see Amadeo's magic. He makes up his mind to strike a pact with a tiny forest fairy, asking her to serve as his scout. Plan set, he steels himself and steps a little deeper into the woods for the day. He clings to the memory of a map from the gods that points east to a forest their power can't reach. Standing at the edge of unknown territory, he steels himself and steps forward. Heavy footfalls tore through the undergrowth, telling of a large creature drawing near. A monstrous wild boar charges from the trees, its snout armed with 3 razor-sharp horns. Jean nimbly slips away from the strike, heart pounding as he pins the creature in his sight. A 3-horn boar. He summons his decapitation sword, magical energy spiraling around his outstretched hand. With one sharp, decisive slash, he cuts the monstrous beast down cleanly. He unleashes his storage skill, and the boar's massive carcass vanishes into thin air. He turns, and his eyes fall on strange plants pushing up from the ground nearby. His face lights up. He recognizes them as wild asparagus and plans to cook them later. He happily tucks a few stalks away, already picturing sharing them with Ash and the others. He crouches, then senses a new presence and snaps his head up, wide-eyed and wondering what it could be. A beautiful single-horned snow leopard, a Yuki Hue, pads silently out of the forest. The mythical beast lets out a soft, plaintive whimper, pressing a paw to its mouth. Jean's eyes snapped wide in pure shock at the sight of the legendary creature. He stammers, eyes wide as he tries to process what he's seeing, and finally manages to name it, a Yuki Hue. The creature makes another soft sound, as if trying to tell him something. Jean stares at the Yuki Hue, hanging on every tiny movement, desperate to understand what it's trying to say. A voice suddenly rings in his mind, urgent and impossible to ignore, telling him the creature has a request. A majestic white stag appears, translating the Yuki Hue's plea. Help Majaru and form a contract. Gina froze, stunned, as a second creature appeared, acting as a translator for the first. He can't stop wondering what these creatures are. Could the Yuki Hue be a spirit? The Yuki Hue declares it's a holy beast, horned, pure, and free of dark miasma. Jean asks about Majiru, and the white stag explains softly that Majiru is its dear friend. He pieces it together. Maharu is slipping into a black spirit, and the change needs his help. The creatures offer him a reward. They'll make a sanctuary anywhere he wants. They say this sanctuary will be a safe haven, a place that keeps every monster and dark spirit at bay. John's eyes light up. A base in the forest would be perfect for his work of naming spirits. He nods, agrees to their terms, and asks where to go. The Yuki Hue instructs him to ride the deer. He springs onto the stag's back, grabs its antlers tight, and shouts that he's ready. The stag's powerful hoof digs into the earth, coiling for an explosive burst. A sudden whiplash-inducing surge of speed rips Gina backward. The world whips past as Jean shouts at the stag for moving so suddenly. He clings to the antlers like his life depends on it, amazed and terrified by the incredible speed. The stag's hooves clawed into the ground as it skidded to a sudden jarring halt. Jean's momentum rips him forward, and he's flung off the stag's back onto the grass. He jerks upright, dizzy and irritated, shouting at the creature for stopping without warning. Calm as a winter lake, the Yukihu tells him that Majiru, the spirit horse, has now arrived. A proud dark horse steps into the clearing, its mane and tail wrapped in ethereal black fire. The horse glares down at him, nostrils flaring and eyes blazing, as if demanding to know why a human was brought here. Jean stared at the creature, a chill of recognition running through him. This had to be Majiru. He points out that the horse's corruption is advanced, its shoulder already dissolving into shadow. He stared the proud spirit straight in the eye and asked its name to begin the contract. He remembers the rule. Name spirits grow stronger whenever they form new bonds. Majiru scoffs in disgust, refusing outright to strike a contract with a mere human. Jean stared, trying to figure out how to convince the stubborn spirit. Maybe he'd have to draw a magic circle. He turns his back on magic and takes a far more direct approach. With shocking strength, John lunges and brings the massive horse crashing to the ground. Holding the stunned spirit down, he softens his voice, tells it not to be afraid, and asks its name. The Yukihu buries its face in a paw, appalled by how cruel Jane's methods are. Majora broke into a cold sweat, utterly overwhelmed and terrified by the human's unexpected power. John kneels over the defeated spirit, his voice soft but unyielding as he asks again, "What is your name?" Deep in the forest's shadowed heart, Jean whispers Majaru, readying himself to forge a new contract. Alone in the thick green tangle, he stands and keeps repeating that he wants to form a bond. A soft light suddenly flares from his hand, and he gasps in surprise. Clutching his chest, he gasps that his magic has been drained, but the contract was a success. The majestic stag, speaking in a dry, almost teasing tone about his hard struggle, annoyed the leopard. Jean turns to the spirits and asks if they know of a beautiful place where their kind can gather. The white stag lowers its head, gently inviting Jean to climb onto its back. Majiru, the spirit horse, shakes his mane and scoffs at the human's boldness for daring to ride the stag. Perched on the stag, Janice was surprised to find the ride so comfortable. The stag suddenly rockets forward, Jan clinging on, eyes wide with panic. The forest melts into a dizzy blur as they hurtle forward at an impossible speed. The ride jerks to a sudden stop, hurling Jane forward so she tumbles face first into the undergrowth. He brushes himself off as the stag, all cool and casual, asks how he likes the new location. John looked around and his face lit up. The clearing was so much better than he had imagined. The two mystical creatures announce, their voices ringing out, that they will now create a protective barrier. The horned leopard shuts its eyes and hums, drawing in a fierce, pulsing energy. A shimmering wave of magic pours outward, swelling and spreading until it fills the entire clearing. A vast, translucent dome now wraps the sanctuary, cutting it off from the outside world. Jean's heart sinks as he worries the barrier might stop his new horse spirit from entering. The Stagria reassures him that his contract will let Majiru pass through freely. With their tasks complete, the spirit bids them farewell, and he thanks them from the heart for their help. A blinding flash split the air, and the two majestic guardians of the forest vanished. John stands alone in the soft, peaceful hush of the haven he has just created. He pulls out his map and stops, spotting a change that sparks his curiosity. He gasps, surprised to find a new location has been added to the parchment. He can't shake the thought that the map is showing Maharu's range now, not just the places he's visited. A bright blush of pure joy blooms across his face as he pictures finishing the map. Standing by the tranquil pool, he thinks about how to best use his new sanctuary. The scene shifts, sweeping us into Narua, a bustling trading city set right by the sea. Jean steps into the city, his eyes drinking in the skyline. He's here to study its architecture for his own projects. He stops, eyes drawn to an ornate window of many circular glass panes. He narrows his eyes and triggers his powerful appraisal skill, eager to learn more. His ability reveals the glasses to be high quality and crystal clear. He can't help but compare it to the rough, bubbly glass he'd seen back in the town of Kassam. In the shop, he stands in awe of the fine parchment and the intricately carved boxes. He can't help but marvel at a display of elegant dresses and sparkling accessories. He lifts a beautiful red goblet and decides to buy it, even though he knows it'll probably be expensive. As he steps into Apothecary, he can't help but wonder how advanced medicine is in this world. His eyes widen in shock the moment he spots a massive bin heaped with cacao beans. The shopkeeper hails it as a medicine for youth, but John knows it must be bitter. He says the nobles love it with milk and sugar, and its price just keeps climbing. Jean's face drops when he realizes just how insanely expensive the beans are. The price shocks him, but his craving for a taste of home wins out, and he buys them. He realizes the beans demand tricky, careful processing, and that very effort makes them even more valuable. He beams, thrilled to be discovering the gourmet side of this new world. A voice burst out, motioning toward the young man with black hair. A distinguished old gentleman, cane in hand, fixes him with a warm, knowing look and softly remarks on his beauty. Jean flushes for a moment, suddenly flustered. Could the old man really be flirting with him? He pulls himself together in a heartbeat and, with a polite smile, asks if the gentleman needs something. The man rushed to explain he'd been admiring Jones's backpack, the new model from the Agir Guild. The old gentleman pauses, eyes distant, and quietly notes that the town of Agir lies very far away. Jean pictures the region's snowy mountains and can't help musing that he could make better gear himself. The man apologizes for stopping him, then gives a warm, friendly wave goodbye. Jean's sweat's pulse jumped as he realized this was the 10th time a stranger had approached him. He desperately wishes a merchant would wander in to consume, so he could promote his toilet design. After taking in the sights, he decides it's time to chase his true goal. In the general store, he asks the woman what she's been looking for. He clears his throat and, plainly and with quiet urgency, explains he's searching for a book about spirits. He insists he wants a rare text that lays out, in chilling detail, how to capture spirits. A solemn young man steps forward and bluntly declares that such books are not for public sale. He hints that if a book like that exists, you'd find it here, only it's sold illegally. Jean can't shake the thought of finding the book in a dim, shady antique shop. The old woman tells him a proper bookstore is the most likely place to look. He asks her politely where to find a bookstore that might have what he needs. He steps into the shop. The tiny bells tinkle announcing his arrival. The clerk asks, voice bright, if he's looking for decorative books, offering 2 different kinds. The clerk says one kind is just a hollow box, meant for stashing little trinkets. Jean makes it clear. He wants a real readable book that also doubles as a beautiful decoration. The clerk sets down 2 tomes, one full of blank pages, the other a mischievous prank book. He can't help but notice the blank book is pricier. You can actually write in it. Jean narrowed his eyes and activated his skill too, straining to see the magic hiding inside the books. He spots a tiny fairy on the prank book, and its text keeps rewriting itself. The little spirit seems startled as his hand edges closer to the book's cover. The clerk says quietly that the prank book is written in a script only its owner can read. Jean feels its purpose, to guard secrets, especially the dark, whispered ones about magic and curses. He thinks trying to crack a text like that without the key would be nearly impossible. He feels a jolt and, all at once, realizes there must be a second book that pairs with it. He holds the 2 books together, a small thrill running through him as he correctly guesses they're a matching set. The clerk warns him the set is expensive, but Jean beams and cheerfully agrees to buy it. He thanks the clerk for his help and steps out of the store, clutching his precious purchase. Joy floods him as he realizes the books are spirit-bound originals, not mere copies. With his mission complete and his pockets empty, he steels himself to leave the city. That evening he reads by the fire in his own quiet way, his spirit wolf sleeping close beside him. He learns that the danger in spirit contracts hinges on compatibility and the raw strength of the magic. The book reveals that contracts let you pull spirits into places where they don't belong. He hesitates, thinking about how much energy it would take to summon a fire spirit onto this snowy mountain. He muses that spirits are everywhere, yet each one differs wildly in nature. His mind drifts to the goddesses Mishut and Haralfa, both light spirits, yet each so utterly different. He can't help laughing as he remembers the helpless little orb of light, insisting its failure wasn't its fault. He realizes, with a small sting, that he's rarely listened to the requests of his own house spirits. The next morning the sun climbed into the sky, pouring warm light over his peaceful estate. Magnificent breakfast platters were laid out, piled high with savory meats and warm buttery croissants. Adelheid, his guest, eats with her eyes closed, utterly lost in pure bliss. Her butler Note agrees. A warm, delicious breakfast really is a wonderful thing. Jean grins, explaining he cooked all the perishables before they set off on their quest. He notes that a hot breakfast is a rare treat in this world of cold, simple meals. A curious Note wonders whether Adelheid's noble household too skips cooking in the morning. Jean explains that most people head out at sunrise, so conserving firewood is common practice. The meal is finished, and the clean plate says it all. They're completely satisfied. She'll call out that it's nearly time to leave, asking his friends to wait just a moment. Adelheid and her butler look up, faces creased with confusion, as Jean approaches them. He passes a huge, heavy bundle into her hands, and Adelheid takes it with a visible, strained effort. Jean grins, explaining it's weighed down with supplies for Dean's party too. He gives one last wave, sees them off, and they walk away, calling out their thanks. Now alone, John announces his next task. He must go get his own building materials. He carefully inspects a stack of sturdy, well-made bricks for his new project, eyes sharp and steady on every brick. He then studies several beautifully ornate pattern tiles, lost in thought. Jean chats excitedly about his plans and the things he bought with a friendly blonde shopkeeper. Back to his old self, Rich beams as he announces he can join Jean in the new safe zone. The fluffy spirit wolf bounces around Jones's feet, spinning in a circle of pure joy. Jean scoops up the giddy Rish, deciding to take him along as he teleports. They arrive in a sunlit meadow, his boots sinking into the soft green grass. Cradling Rish, Jean spots a tiny glowing spirit dancing through the air. But the instant they arrived, every nearby spirit bolted away in sheer panic. John frowned in confusion, wondering why they'd fled, and turned to Rish. "Did you startle them?" He sets Rish down gently, smiling as he reassures him that it's perfectly safe to play inside the white line. He thinks, "It's time to begin," and pulls a shovel from his magical storage. He thrusts the shovel's blade deep into the earth, ready to start construction. He's planning to build a little 2-story house right here in this clearing. He pictures a cozy second floor where he can finally unwind after a long day. He'll even make a huge garden so Rish can run and play while he works. He's already spent days hauling plaster, wood, and bricks for the fireplace. After some hard work, he leans his weight on the shovel and decides to take a breather. He beams and calls out to Rish, who's happily exploring the new space. Rich eagerly laps up the cool water from the bowl Join has provided. For lunch, Jean has put together a delicious-looking bagel sandwich for himself. He sits at a small rustic table, savoring his meal in the peaceful clearing. Meanwhile, Rich has found a sturdy stick and sniffs it with delighted curiosity. He settles in and chews on his prize, perfectly content with his find. John daydreams about planting a vibrant garden and building a coffee siphon. He's halfway through a quiet lunch when an unexpected guest arrives and breaks the calm. A magnificent horned snow leopard, the Yuki-Hyu, pads into view, utterly silent. Soon after, a majestic white stag appears, its silvery antlers gleaming and impossible to ignore. Then a powerful, dark mane horse steps into the procession of magical beasts. Jean reels, utterly startled, as the third creature suddenly appears. The three animals stare, solemn and fierce, their eyes fixed on Rich. A voice rings in Jean's head, trembling with one question. "Why is the great Lord Rish here?" She almost choked, stunned to hear his small companion addressed with such reverence. The creatures stand stunned in awe, wondering how their lord could have come to be here. "Lord Rish," John repeats out loud, his head spinning with confusion. The animals still remember their lord disappearing 5 years ago, the day the summoning failed. John ties their tale to the moment he arrived, the timeline lining up perfectly. He turns to his companion, eyes sharp, and asks, "Rich, were you the boss of Yuki-Hyu's?" Rich just tilts his head, a stick dangling from his mouth, his face utterly clueless. John realizes Rish either has amnesia or just doesn't care, so he drops it. He's still amazed that Rish somehow knows these powerful beings. He stares at the pristine wilderness, his heart aching as he wonders if this forest used to be Rish's home. As Rish pulls on his coat, Jean nods, smiling. A forest suits a wolf. The stag keeps up its praise, loudly declaring it is rich and more powerful than any other spirit. The horse adds that Rish is freer than any of his kind. The Yuki-Hyu finishes, declaring that Rish's voice can reach the world's end. Jean can't help but feel annoyed as the Yuki-Hyu keeps praising Rish non-stop. He tries to get back to work, but the creatures whisper a title. Hearing them call Rish the Apostle of the Wind leaves him puzzled. Rich, triumphant after finding a measuring tape, proudly hands it to Jean. Jean's chest tightens as he remembers the creature's words about what happened in the past. He knows his house is kept safe by a barrier that cuts it off from the rest of the world. He can't stop wondering if Rish's title is somehow tied to the forest location. He turned to the creatures and asked them to explain what they meant by a puzzle of the wind. The stag reveals that Rish was tied to the hero of the previous generation. Is Jean grows seething, certain the former hero must have damaged the forest? The stag makes it clear. The hero built a vessel that could run across the water. John realizes with a jolt, they mean a ship, a gift given to the city of Naroa film. He suddenly panics. What if Rish hates him for using similar powers? He crouches down, deflated and sick with worry at the thought of Rish judging him. But Rish just rolls onto his back, demanding a belly rub as his fears melt away. The creatures say with quiet sorrow that the forest still hasn't returned to its western home. Jean can't shake the thought that humans are safe only inside towns and villages. Step into the forest and you plunge straight into a dangerous world of spirits and monsters. He knows humans push outward, clearing forests and building ships. The horse grimly realizes the current summoner is nowhere near a spirit of light. It thinks Rish, explaining that thanks to him it avoided falling into ruin. Jean explains he got this land in exchange for helping 2 of them. He can still hear the warning, a troublesome being was right here. A beautiful woman appears and says that the hero is weak, but protected. Jean assures her he'll stay away, while Rish affectionately licks his hand. He doesn't regret cranking his pantry to life, but he knows it still needs more magic tucked inside. Blessed by the gods, he cooks like a master, but he knows he must learn to fight. He asked Rish, voice trembling, Did you lose your memories when you lost most of your power? He can't help but think that his pact with the gods only goes so far. The Yukihyu admits it doesn't know all the details of Rish's past. Tears in its eyes, the stag cries out that Lord Rish is great and merciful. Overwhelmed, Jean lifts a hand and tells them he understands, pleading, please stop. Relaxed and back in his usual groove, he gets ready to enjoy a nice meal. He clasps his hands in thanks, grinning at the delicious spread of food before him. He slurps his noodles with a happy grin, savoring the rich, wonderful flavor. He mulls over resuming his construction and farming projects in the sanctuary. He plans to put his appraisal skill to work, seeking out new seeds for his garden. A thrill runs through him. With his knowledge, he might even be able to breed brand new plants. He can't wait for this day he can sit in a restaurant and savor a delicious meal. He finishes his meal, gratitude welling up. His body had been enhanced before he arrived here. 2 mountain peaks stand proud and majestic beneath a bright, clear sun. Back at his construction site, Yin pounds stones with a heavy mallet, each strike thundering through the air. He sinks to his knees, carefully smoothing the earth as he prepares the foundation. At night, he whispers a name to a small, dark spirit, its shadowy shape wrapped in a swirl of glowing magic. He walks through his growing fields, smiling to himself as he thinks about how far he's come and the steady progress he's made. He knows the spirits will help the vegetables he grabbed from his pantry grow. He ticks off the plants he's growing, a smile already on his face as he dreams of the harvest to come. For a heartbeat, he wonders how Adelheide's subjugation force is doing, but he isn't worried. He hoists a rope and shouts, "Let's go, Rish!" ready for the next task. Jean grins and playfully tosses a knotted rope toy to his spirit companion, Rish. Rish springs up and, with a triumphant snap, expertly catches the toy midair. The proud little wolf spirit trots back with his prize, beaming with pride. Jean laughs warmly, mussing Rish's fur with a loving ruffle and showering praise on his impressive catch. He tells the curious Rich, it's time to go back inside now. He's been itching to try a brand new special experiment. In his workshop, he announces with bright excitement that he'll create a magic circle. Following the book, he grinds herbs and minerals with a pestle. He stirs the powder into spirit-infused water until it dissolves, the liquid becoming a special ink. With his materials ready, he braces himself to begin the intricate magical drawing. With steady hands, he fills the fragile ruling pen with the freshly made ink. With a compass in hand, he draws the book's intricate geometric pattern. He then traces symbols from a second grimoire, weaving them into the first set of instructions. He wonders aloud which spirit he should try to summon first. A tiny winged earth fairy pops out of the circle, letting out a joyful cheer. Right after, a cheerful gelatinous water slime jiggles happily into existence. 2 fiery salamanders dart out, scampering after each other in a frantic race around the circle. Jean cries out in frustration, "Don't just blurt it out!" He shoos them away, worried they'll ruin his carefully drawn parchment. He pauses, caught in the chaos, trying to work out what to do next. He decides to try summoning a different element, ice. Rich bursts into view right in front of him, panting happily with a bright, excited grin. Jewel's eyes snap open as she suddenly remembers that Rish is an ice spirit. He turned to Rich, hopeful, and asked if he could help him make ice cream sometime soon. Jean declares that this time he'll pick the spirit beforehand. He decides that now that he's made a field, he'll summon the harvest. He draws the symbol of the goddess of the harvest, pouring magic into it. A soft puff of smoke curls up from the completed magic circle. A kind old woman steps forward with a gentle smile and tells him, "I'm Val." She explains that she presides over the earth as it brims with abundance. Jean Stammers gave a small knowing nod, admitting he already knew who she was. He panics, heart pounding. Is this a prank or did he really just summon a god? His eyes suddenly widen in shock as the ink on the circle begins to sizzle. A hand jabs at the vanishing circle and Jung spins around, confused. He freezes in shock. The god Vafon is standing right behind him. Vafon gestures as the final wisp of magical ink fades away. Jean explains he followed the book's instructions to the letter, but the circle just vanished. Vafon snaps that the book is wrong, as Gakul explains the ink's limitations. A soft, ethereal laugh suddenly ripples through the small workshop. Her alpha pops up and tells Jane that he seems to be having a lot of fun. The goddess smiles warmly and says that watching him fills her with joy. Jean throws up his hands and asks, "When did you all arrive without me noticing?" Haralfa explains that the room is brimming with tiny, pleasant spirits. She closes her eyes and murmurs how cozy the atmosphere is. Word Ill explains these spirits burst to life with the morning and fade away by evening. The entire pantheon has assembled. Jean stands frozen, utterly stunned. Ordale tells him sharply that he should have just asked them about summoning spirits. Gina asks, voice trembling with hope, "Will they teach him? Is this an aftercare session?" The fawn-looking board decides a sparring match will do instead. The scene shifts to a sun-dappled clearing in the forest, sunlight dancing across the ground. Vaffen stands ready, teeth clamping down on John, the signal to begin their training duel. Jean lunges forward, hurling himself into a swift attack against the god. He grips his sword tightly, his face a hard mask of pure determination. With one effortless hand, Fafon catches the blade and stops the attack. The force of the impact hurls Jean backward. She staggers, crying out. He hits the ground hard, wincing in pain from the fall. The Fond looks down and says sharply that Jean's movements have gotten worse. Jane looks up, eyes wide with confusion, and asks what the god could mean by that. He explains that he tried to weave in the styles of his adventure friends. John blushes, suddenly aware that his movements have become messy and uncoordinated. He admits he was only copying others. He never made the style his own. The Fun asked, sounding upset, what happened to his sword image, saying it was better before. Jean closes his eyes, reaching inward to find the single image that holds the heart of his swordsmanship. He remembers watching dazzling fantasy films and gritty, down-to-earth samurai dramas. He realizes the samurai dramas have left a far deeper mark on him than he thought. He can't help but think his current sword belongs to a fantasy RPG hero. A revelation hits him like a thunderbolt. It's the sword's very style that's the problem. The ornate decapitation sword hovers before him as he stands there, lost in thought. He looks up, his eyes going wide as sudden understanding hits him. Fafon conjures a fresh blade from thin air and cries out that it's a Japanese sword. The beautiful katana floats in hands waiting by his jeans, shimmering with power. He can't help but notice the fantasy-style silver chain. It's not the traditional Saggio cord he'd expected. Buffon stands with his arms crossed and, in a surprised tone, remarks that it's an unusual design. Jean agreed, his voice heavy with memory. This was a sword from his homeland. He plants his thumb on the tuba, heart racing as he prepares to draw the blade. In a swift motion, he draws the katana and slips into a ready stance. Dark energy coils around the blade as he swings it with newfound confidence. But Fawn asks if he's ready to keep going with their training session. Jean's face glows with determination as he asks for Fawn to proceed. The spar resumes as steel clashes, its ringing echo cutting through the clearing. Their blades meet again, and Jean's focus is razor-sharp and unshakable. He leaps into the air and brings his katana down in a powerful, crushing strike. Vafan parries the blow effortlessly, his face cool, calm, and controlled. Jean thinks the flashy effects in fantasy films were nothing but a dizzy, confusing blur. Now that he can see it in his head, fighting's easier, and way more fun. The Fund praises the improvement it sees in John, and John thanks him, glowing with pride. Jean knows the sword can't harm its creator, so he fights without holding back. Training complete, he can't help but wonder if he'll one day surpass Vafon. Wish bounded over, showering his cheek with affectionate licks. Misha and Haralfa appear, beaming as they congratulate him on his hard work. Jean finds himself surrounded by the two beautiful goddesses, blushing and utterly flustered. Back in the workshop, the Fawn holds out a book and calls his name. Fafon insists that the interpretation in John's original book is flat out wrong. He advises John, go to a temple in Termist in 7 days. Termist is an island just south of the Caval Peninsula. A fresh, exciting new destination. Vafan promises he'll see to it that he gets the right book there. Jean's stomach drops as he realizes he has only 1 week to save enough money to buy the book. He walks past a hooded figure, convinced he'd planted a lot of things. Rows of young, healthy seedlings rise from the tilled field. Jean looks back, smiling nervously as unease quietly creeps up on him. John replayed the day's words about the unique taste of humanoid spirits. The young god was mesmerized by this world's crops, and Jung was too. Jean's meals had blossomed from meager survival rations into elegant, thoughtfully made salads. He arrived in Narua Felt, a grand, bustling trade city that burst with noise and color, and an ornate sign hanging from a building whispered of the city's elegance. He sat alone on the restaurant terrace, quietly drinking in the wide, moving view of the sea. Before him lay a lavish meal. Steak, pate, and rich, creamy pasta. He savored the delicious truffle pasta, impressed by how advanced the city's cuisine was. The merchant's grin widened as he cheerfully told him the monster pelt would sell well here. With his finances secure, he paused, wondering what to do next. He wandered through the weaponsmith's shop, his eyes tracing the line of swords laid out for sale. He mused, feeling a hollow ache, that he couldn't find a sword like his own decapitation sword. He spotted a curved blade, sure it was the closest thing he'd find. Then the shopkeeper offered to let him see the spirit weapons he kept. The smith explained that these were weapons made by spirits, or even inhabited by them. Jean felt it in his bones. His sword had to be a spirit weapon, crafted by the fawn. The smiths insisted these weapons deserved a warm, comfortable place to rest, not some cold, impersonal magical storage. Jan thanked the man and walked away, a new understanding of his divine blade settling deep inside him. Back in his room, he readied himself for his daily scrying ritual, his hands moving with practiced care. He stood over a basin of water, eyes fixed, ready to watch the adventures unfold. The water swirled, and an image of the subjugation party began to form. Watching the subjugation team has settled into his daily rhythm. He sipped his tea and, heart skipping, realized they were Amadeo's famed gold rank party. He called on the nearby spirits for help, and the vision became startlingly clear. He watched the warrior, puzzled why 2 women were walking beside him. He munched a walnut and noticed the warrior had other followers too. He could feel it deep in his bones. Those 3 adventurers were particularly special. A chill ran through him as he realized the cloaked woman was a mage with a light spirit. Her vine-wrapped bow said it all. She probably carried a wind spirit and a green spirit. He couldn't help but chuckle. The warrior spirit looked exactly like a prairie dog. He stared, stunned. Where could a prairie dog possibly have come from in this world? His thoughts wandered to his friends, and he couldn't stop wondering where Ash's party was. In the vision, Chris and his 5 companions pushed through the forest. Adelheid pointed out the spirits she could see hovering around Chris and Dean. John remembered how his own spirit had reacted strangely to the smell of Dean's boots. He also remembered how his spirit had melted at the sight of Rhett's impressive beard. He silently pleaded with his spirit, begging it not to pick up any more weird tastes. He noticed the gold-ranked spirits were huge and radiant, a sharp contrast to his own small, shadowy ones. In his vision, the warrior found himself staring down a massive lizard monster. The warrior grinned and surged forward, sword in hand, charging straight at the beast. The mage's hand moved calmly, shaping a powerful spell to finish the fight. She whispered a spell, channeling all her vast magic into a single blazing point. A brilliant flash shot from her staff and slammed into the creature. The lizard was killed in an instant, its tiny body going limp and collapsing to the ground. June stood breathless, amazed and wondering at the spirit's incredible power. But then he saw it. Something was wrong with one of the team members. Clad in armor, the man drew his sword, his face cold and expressionless as carved stone. He fell into step behind the archer as she walked away from the others. Without warning, he lifted his sword high, ready to strike her from behind. The blade sliced through the air, silent and full of murderous intent. The archers whipped around and with her dagger deflected the sudden attack. They were locked in a desperate struggle. Her former comrade now an enemy. Jean couldn't help but be impressed. The archer was shockingly skilled at fighting up close. He could see the man was possessed. His eyes were shadowed and empty. A small, malevolent black spirit clung to the man's chest, gripping him with a desperate, unyielding hold. The spirit burst out of the man and shot straight for the archer. It slipped back to its host, who now seemed much weaker. The spirit hurled itself at the archer again, a shadowy blur of raw energy. It was flung back, repelled by some kind of invisible barrier. The archer froze, stunned as he realized the attack had been deflected. The dark spirit swooped back into its original host, who was now faltering. John felt it in his bones. A spirit needs a vessel to hold on to its power. The archer knew her ally was possessed, every hair on her neck prickling, but she couldn't see the spirit. John watched, breath caught, waiting to see what her next move would be. He couldn't help but wonder how anyone was supposed to beat a dark spirit. A spirit weapon could kill a possessed person, but using it felt all wrong. Grimm's resolve hardened, and the archer drew her vine-covered spirit bow. John's blood ran cold when he realized she intended to kill the vessel itself. The man screamed as the arrow struck, dark energy erupting from the wound. Jean reeled as the brutal truth sank in. Life in this world was so cheap. He realized that death was far more common here. He slapped his cheeks, snapping himself into calm and focus. He took a deep breath and turned his gaze back to the basin. He remembered that spirits were untouchable, unless their vessel was attacked. He stared, baffled. Why hadn't the archer attacked when the spirit was exposed? Right then, an adventurer from another party stumbled onto the scene. He froze, eyes wide, staring at the lifeless body of his fallen comrade. He raced toward the corpse, utterly oblivious to the danger lurking in the shadows. John felt a sharp pang of sadness as he realized they must have been allies. The dark spirit slipped out of the dead man, reaching into the air as it sought a new host. It burrowed into the newcomer's chest, and they cried out in pain. The archer and the man threw out panicked words, neither of them understanding the other. Dread slammed into her. The archer couldn't see the black spirit. John knew spirit sight varied. Some saw bright auras, while others saw nothing at all. The newly possessed man clutched his chest as the spirit sank into him and took hold. He wondered if the invader was forcing him out of his own body. The warrior asked the mage, voice tight with worry, if she could see the other 2 party members. John felt a chill as he remembered Retzi saying, "I'm a day or could see spirits inside people." He couldn't help wondering what this strange, half-possessed state could possibly mean. It wasn't his responsibility, but he knew exactly what could solve this. Ashen and his friends were right there, and he felt he had to do something. He made his decision, firmly telling himself, "All right." He turned to his shadow and light spirits, steeling himself and ready to act. He asked them to cast his face into shadow and lift him high into the air. He even ordered them to hold his hood up, without using his feet. He grinned with quiet confidence and put the final touch on his mysterious magical disguise. The adventurer stood over the body, utterly unaware of a new presence. The warrior demanded to know what had just happened, his voice thick with confusion. The archer admitted she didn't know, only that the man had attacked without warning. She said sorry for what she'd done, her face a mask of shock and regret. An archer and a hooded figure stood back to back, tense and ready for a fight. The adventurers demanded to know, voices sharp with suspicion, who was this mysterious newcomer, and where had he come from? John just smiled and said they wouldn't understand, even if he told them his name. Adelheid recognized her friends, and relief flooded her. Her secret identity as a woman remains safe. Bathed in lights, Jane begs the spirits of sound to keep his voice low. He jabbed a finger at the young man and snapped, "My business is with you. Only you. Me." The young adventurer stammered, completely bewildered by the sudden attention. As Jean reached out, the man felt a strange sensation of fingers sliding into him. Jean shook off the strange flutter in his gut, insisting it was only his imagination. He slapped his hand over the man's eyes and yanked a dark spirit out of his chest. The adventurer froze in horror, recognizing the creature for what it was, a weeping spirit. The other party members, a warrior and a woman, watched on, utterly stunned. She wondered aloud, eyes wide. Could the young adventurer be possessed? She couldn't help noting that the man sprawled unconscious on the ground had been acting strangely. John watched the man staring at his own hands with a baffled, hollow look. He stole a quick look at the fallen warrior, relief flooding him when he saw the man was still alive. Jean sank to his knees beside the unconscious adventurer, every breath steady as he readied himself to offer aid. He called on his healing skill, his hands bathed in a soft, restorative light. The injured man let out a soft groan, beginning to stir from his deep unconsciousness. His eyes fluttered open as the powerful healing magic wrapped itself around him. A companion gaped in disbelief, asking if the man had really woken up. The group surged forward as the healed warrior pushed himself to his feet, everyone calling it a miracle. Jen Watch's gentle smile said it all. He was simply happy he could help. Her eyes went wide. She couldn't believe he'd recovered from a state like that. She confronted John, eyes blazing, demanding to know who and what he really was. Her eyes narrowed into slits as she stared at him, asking about the spirits swirling around them. John admits he usually asks the spirits to hide, but today they help. He looked at the woman and it hit him. She could see them. She glared with suspicion and asked, "Did you just pick up these spirits somewhere?" Jean realized the first man's possession had grabbed his attention and turned it toward them. He let out a soft sigh as the others stared at the back of his cloak. Adelheid felt her brother's intense stare and desperately hoped he hadn't seen through her disguise. The burly adventurer barked, "Jing, wait!" as he turned to leave. Jean ignited his transference magic, his form melting away into countless shimmering motes of light. In a heartbeat, he vanished from the clearing, leaving them all behind. He reappeared somewhere else, clutching the captured spirit, hoping that at last one problem was solved. He chose to unleash this massive dark spirit deep within the forest. He remembered another powerful spirit, a black horse that still held onto its will. He knew these dark spirits brought terrible pain, preying on anyone they could. He'd forbidden the spirits bound to his contract from feeding on one another. He smiled at the tiny creature nestling in his palms, deciding it was time to go home. He lifted his eyes to the distant roof of his manor under a starry sky. Back home, he whispered a heartfelt thanks to the tiny, fairy-like spirits for lending him their power. He stood over the bowl, staring into it, heart tight as he wondered what had happened after he'd left the adventures. For a heartbeat, the scene snapped back to the clearing, where the group still stood. He pictured them dropping to the ground in deep bows, foreheads nearly touching the floor in a gesture of profound apology. He smiled at Riley, thinking they were apologizing even though they'd nearly killed him. He felt possessed, convinced the archer had singled him out. He resolved that the next time he saw Adelheid, he'd ask her what had happened. The scene shifted to the Dionisio family's peaceful rustic home. She cried out as his younger siblings gleefully tried to loosen him up. Jean arrived, telling Shebus to just let them peel his clothes off. The younger children eagerly asked if they could help, and Jean agreed did too. The twins burst into cheers and pounced on their older brother, grinning with mischievous glee. She was just as close while flying as the guy who happily stripped them from his body. The mother appeared, arms full of a fresh set of clothes for her now shirtless son. She explained that their clothes got dirty and Jean stepped in, offering to wash everything. Shiva cringed with mortification, grumbling that John had to see him like this. His mother ignored him, smiling cheerfully as she told him to wash up at the well. John waved as Shiva yelled at his mother, fiercely telling her not to involve their guest. Hair tied back, John rolled up his sleeves and readied himself to work. Amid the world's unbearable filth, his mind kept returning to his studies. He pictured the grime on the roads washing into people's houses whenever it rained. He grimaced at the thought of scooping up horse dung and trying to turn it into fuel. He remembered the other farmers he'd met who just slept on hay in their barns. He knew people here seized every moment because tomorrow was never certain. He felt he couldn't change the world, but he could still be there for his friends. He picked up the broom and began sweeping, determined to give the kind Dionisio family a clean home. The afternoon sky poured down over the transformed and tidy farmstead. The family came back to a home that sparkled, the newly fixed oven gleaming more than anything else. She gaped in awe and blurted, "John, are you some kind of cleaning genius?" Everyone raved about his beautiful work, and Jean said the well was all that remained. Shiva offered to make tifurzan, and tifurzan gratefully accepted. Then the mother asked John to go fetch some quail and eggs for dinner. The youngest children shot their hands up, bursting to volunteer for the task. Later, a friend looked at Jane and asked if he really had a passion for cleaning. John said bluntly that he hated cleaning, leaving his friend staring, clearly puzzled. He said, voice tight, that he simply can't stand on sanitary places, so he has to clean them. The mother came in with dinner, giving a cheeky wink as if to say John just likes pretty things. She set a large steaming bowl of roasted quail and leeks on the table, steam curling up like a warm promise. Jean recognized it as a specialty, and couldn't help saying it looked delicious. He used his appraisal skill, a little thrill running through him as the leeks looked especially flavorful. The skill approved the recipe, and he tucked it into his mind like a secret to use later. The mother's warm smile spread across her face, a gentle invitation for everyone to dig in. The family clasped hands and quietly gave thanks for the warm meal they'd just shared. She'd watched with a soft, tender smile, believing they were the perfect family for him. He couldn't help wondering if he, too, might one day have a family that felt this warm. He brushed the thought away in an instant, his cheeks flushing as he took a bite. The scene slid to the sun-bleached ruins along Thermist Island's coast. She didn't even think to visit the temple before spending his money on the local crafts. He remembered, the god Rorde had recommended this very temple to him. He walked toward the impressive stone building, its steeple clawing at the sky. Inside, he was greeted by a peaceful old man with a long white beard. John raised his hand politely and asked the old man about a certain book. The man stared at John's black hair and purple eyes and knew at once. They matched the god's prophecy. He confirmed he had been told Jean would be coming to the temple. The old man closed his eyes, murmuring that he had received a message meant for him. Jean's brow furrowed in confusion as he wondered aloud what kind of message he could have received. He couldn't shake how odd it felt to call it a message when it was handed to him in person. Then he was spotted handing a book to a woman, his task finally done. Jean smiles gently and, with calm certainty, confirms he understands the situation. The ancient god Gokli beckons him to follow down the corridor. Their boots beat out a steady, rhythmic clack on the polished stone floor. Jean halts mid-step, his eyes snagging on something unexpected up ahead. They stand together in the vast, sunlit home, frozen in their tracks. Before them, a life-size stone statue of a robed figure stands, motionless and silent. He wonders, heart heavy, if this sorrowful, mature statue could be the god Rorde. Gal Gravely's voice drops to a whisper as he says he must swear an oath of absolute silence. A vision of a young Rordale flashes, his voice burning with a promise to swear. With his business done, Gatchel's gaze snaps to the ornate wall mirror. He presses his palm to the glass, and it answers with a soft, shimmering light. His hand slips through the mirror's surface as if it were water. Jean's stares froze, disbelief washing over him as he realized it must be some kind of hidden door. From the passage's inky darkness, a lone candle sputters into view, its tiny flame trembling. A robed figure, its face swallowed by shadow, steps through holding a single light. John stands dumbstruck as this secret keeper suddenly appears.